I call this meeting of the Davenport Community School District Board of Directors to order. We'll start with Director Hayes. Would you please read our board priorities? Would somebody else want to volunteer? Director Crumwitty?
Certainly. The Davenport School Board establishes the following priorities to ensure the academic success of all students: to provide leadership and direction to improve the overall learning environment in our classrooms, schools, and district, including the health, safety, security, and happiness of students and staff. Direct and support actions, programs, and activities which reduce the impacts of poverty on our students, their families, and our community.
Thank you. Director Hayes, did you get yours up? Oh, it's still coming? Are you there? Since you missed out on the board priorities, I would ask if Director DeFau doesn't mind. I'd ask if Director Hayes would want to read our mission and vision statements. What's that?
Students' ability to provide a quality education enriched by the diverse community. Education that challenges conventional thinking prepares all students to compete in a global society and inspires our students, parents, staff, and community to answer the question, what if?
Thank you very much. Move on to student board reports. Superintendent Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'll begin with Bennett.
This weekend at North, we had the elementary solo festival, and that went rather splendidly, I think.
Okay, and then our girls basketball team is still doing really well, and so tonight they are playing to qualify for state, I believe. And also last Friday we had a dance marathon at our school to raise money for children that are in the hospital in Iowa City, and we raised $1,500.
We've had a lot going on at Weston the last week. First, our show choir placed second at the Troy Buchanan Invitational last week, which was pretty awesome. And then our speech and debate team competed at districts last week, which is our nationals qualifier. And Olivia Grubbs qualified for the fourth time, meaning she'll be recognized at nationals and during the final round. And then I also qualified, and we had a few students make semifinals as well, so we had a great weekend.
This past weekend, Central along with West hosted Great River. It's the show choir competition down at the Adler and River Center. We had lots of high schools come, and it was big turnout, great event. And last year we were nationally recognized and given an Inspire Award for our competition, for best competition nationwide. So it was exciting to see everyone come again and give us praise for that. Taste of Pro Start tickets are being sold. This is like the 8th annual event just to recognize the Pro Start program we have and other things going on in the district. And Luke was named a member of the boys academic all-state team for swimming.
Spring sports are starting up. Track and tennis have been practicing in our gyms at Central. And government students took a trip to the Capitol on last Monday, where we met with some of our state representatives and senators and the governor.
Thank you, students. We always appreciate your input. Tell us all the cool things that are happening in your school. Mr. President, that concludes the presentation for tonight.
All right. Thank you very much. Move on to the showcase. Superintendent Tate.
Principal Diane Simmons, Bluegrass, thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Good evening. Let's celebrate the arts. Last school year, Bluegrass Elementary was number 1 in the state and number 84 in the nation for www.artsonia.com. There are over 100 countries and thousands of schools that have an online gallery, so that very exciting, this was very exciting news to our school to be number 1 in the state and number 84 in the nation. Currently, as of this year, we're number 2 in the state and number 82 in the nation. We have 2,361 pieces that are being showcased right now at that website. And these are all works of arts by Bluegrass students. Since 2002, we have had more than 38,000 pieces of work by Bluegrass students published. Just this month alone, more than 70 pieces of artwork have been published. Our website has received a total of 110 awards, and that number is still growing. All of this is credited to our Bluegrass art teacher, Mrs. Sarah Graham. Mrs. Graham has been selected to receive the Artsonia's annual Leadership Award a total of 13 times, one for every year she has published artwork since 2002. This is an honor extended to teachers for only 10 schools per state across the United States. The Artsonia Leadership Award honors teachers who go beyond the classroom walls to encourage family and community involvement. The award also recognizes significant achievement in the area of technology integration within the school arts program. I would like to introduce to you Mrs. Graham. Where are you?
I'm right behind you.
This is Mrs. Graham, and she's going to share more with you about Artsonia and the work she's doing, but she is one of our teachers who does go above and beyond. Mrs. Graham?
I already switched it to 2, so you
Okay.
don't have to do anything. Hi, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Artsonia and why I use it. First, let me say it's my 14th year at Bluegrass, and in 2001, we had an in-service that kind of was telling us about technology and promoting the arts, and that's one thing that I love about this district is its value in the arts and how much it's important to these kids to keep that creative thought process and helps them in so many other different classrooms. And I had a student that same year, we kind of had this meeting, and she was really sad, and her dad was he was in the, I think he was in the Air Force, and he was going to have to go away for about 6 to 8 months. And she was like, I just don't know how I'm going to connect with him. And so this kind of had me thinking, and I was introduced to this website, and I thought, the main purpose for me to do this is so that the kids have connections to family and friends that they're not living with. And it's a way to communicate with them in a different way. It's a way to promote this district. It's a way to promote the arts. And it's just been such a great communication tool with my students, with the parents, and with their families, because I'm able to put statements up on what they're supposed to be learning and what my expectations were, and they can see how they fulfilled them. Artsonia has different awards it can hand out. They have a random draw every week where a student, and it's usually one student a year from Bluegrass, and they have a chance to win a $50 gift certificate from Dick Blick. And if they would win, the art department would get a $100 gift certificate from Dick Blick to help go towards the classroom. Because we're kind of a smaller school compared to in the United States, I can be going up with a school that has 5,000 students in an elementary. And so we haven't won yet, but there has been some really good things. I've had 2 past students that have had their artwork rights bought from Artsonia, and their artwork is currently in art curriculum education books. So that's kind of a big deal, and one was published last year with that. students have an opportunity to win awards, and there's 3 areas they can win awards. They can win awards for artwork published, so all of my Bluegrass students earn that one award because they all get at least 5 things published every year. They have an opportunity for fan clubs, so that would be parents and family members that sign up to leave or get emails saying that their artwork's put on. If they get 5 or more of that, then they earn that award. And if their comments, people leave comments and the parents approve of the comments, then they can get another award for statements. So it's kind of a neat thing that it's interactive for the students and for the families. And I have one letter that I would like to share. This is from a student who is in college now, and she wrote me 2 weeks ago. And so I'd like to read this to you. Hi, Mrs. Graham. Just writing you to let you know how much I enjoyed your elementary school art classes and how often I look back on them as an adult. Lately, I've checked back on Artsonia, where all of our artwork is still posted, and it is quite the remembrance of how well my artistic skills have advanced. Just this last Christmas, I actually went on the website and purchased mugs decorated with various pieces of my former artworks to give to my parents. They absolutely loved it and fought over who got which design. I am at the University of Iowa. I also have a few old Bluegrass pals attending here, and I've sent them links to their former pages on the website. It's so entertaining to look back and see all the types of work we did in your class and the unique mediums we used. In the College of Education, I've had quite a few experiences with students drawing during their times together, especially illustrations from writing prompts or express feelings during read-alouds. And I will hopefully have my own classroom within the next few years. I'm so excited for my students to be able to artistically explore outside of the classroom and grow creatively. I think art class is so important, and you truly showed us that by encouraging unique and true-to-self pieces and posting our artwork online as if we were famous artists. I hope you're having a great year. Best wishes, Lauren Hawley. And that's one thing that they all think they're famous artists when they walk into my room, and I always tell them that their artwork's worth $1 million. And so when they take them home at the end of the year, we have portfolios, and there's $10 million in this portfolio, take care of it. And it's just another way to have them value and treasure all the stuff that they do. And now we have some guest speakers that are going to talk about this also. Thank you.
I would like to introduce some of our parents and their students who would like to share with you their experiences on Artsonia. Mr. and Mrs. Kurtz and Kaysen. I'm going to introduce all of them while I'm up here. Mrs. Waring, and Mrs. Waring's 2 children couldn't be here with us tonight because of other commitments. Mrs. Green with Jalen and Riley, and Mr. and Mrs. Powell with Owen and Cody. So if you'd come up.
Good evening. We've had a great privilege at Bluegrass Elementary School to have Artsonia. It's been a lot for our family with grandparents, aunts, and uncles living out of town, and to be able to see our daughter Kaysen's artwork at Bluegrass. It's even so neat that during Christmas time, we order some cards to send so that she has Christmas cards to send out. Kaysen has had the privilege to have Grandpa and Grandma leave comments and notes, and then it gets sent to our email to go okay those notes so then Kaysen can review them. Kaysen, what's your favorite part? What do you think? What's your favorite part about having Grandpa? What's Grandpa do to your notes? What's he do?
He writes my notes.
Yeah, he writes your notes on it, doesn't he? So Grandpa gets on there weekly to write notes to say about how he likes our artwork. As you can see up here, he talks about the leaves are falling. Talk about the trees that she's made. Her uncle talked about that when he lives overseas and saying how her blue eyes matches my blue eyes. And just those little notes, those kind words that mean a lot to us and a lot to Kaysen. So we're very privileged to have Mrs. Graham brought us Artsonia, her being a full-time art teacher at Bluegrass. And she gives her the time to do this, and so we're very happy to have her at our school.
Hi, Hi, my name is Joyce Warning, and I have a first grader and a third grader at Bluegrass Elementary. Artsonia is fantastic. The one thing I can say about it, it's easy to use, very easy. I am not technologically inclined. I'm a veterinarian. I work more hands-on, not with the computer stuff as much. And it's even easy for me to use. It's mostly through email. They send a link to the Artsonia page with each email you get. So my parents and my husband's parents, so grandparents and aunts and uncles and everything are signed up. And I get an email every time the children have new artwork on there. All the relatives get that same email, and you can just go on and see their artwork. And then all the the grandparents and whoever's involved can post messages. And it's been even easy for my husband's parents, who are below me on the technology level, to be able to post messages back so the kids can see them. And it's wonderful when people live in different states to be able to interact that way. My mother quilts, and she ordered quilt squares of all of my daughter's artwork and actually made her a quilt with all of her artwork on it. So that was very, very neat. There's one more thing I wanted to say, and that is my son is very artistic, and he would come home and draw pictures at home, and I'd be like, where'd you get the idea of that? And then within a day, it would pop up on Artsonia, and I'd be like, oh, he's redoing what he did in school, and I had no idea. So when he's doing stuff at home, he's replicating what he's learning in school, and to me that was absolutely amazing. So it has been wonderful.
Good evening. My name is Scott Powell. We really enjoy this program. While my family is close to us here in the area, my wife's family is all from Ohio, so they are able to see what the boys are doing in the art classes and such. Would you guys like to say what you like about this?
What I like about Artsonia is that I can look back and actually see what I've done, and then actually remember what I have been doing, and then remember it because it's on Artsonia. So that's how I like it.
Cody?
I like Artsonia because of the animations and other pictures that are in there and arts.
Okay, thanks, Cody.
Hello, I'm Lauren. Lauren Green. This is my kindergartner Riley and my fourth grader Jalen. We came to Bluegrass when Jalen was in second grade, so Artsonia was new to us and very cool. It seems like usually you get bombarded with all the art, with the art portfolio at the end of the year, so this helps us see what they're doing throughout the year. We have, my family's from here, and then my husband's family is from Alabama and North Carolina, so they get to see it throughout the year as well, instead of being bombarded once or twice a year if they come to see us. We use Artsonia for gifts, for Christmas presents, birthday presents. It's neat to have in the office, or my mom has one of Riley's trees on her cell phone, so she gets to show all of the kids that she works with the kiddo stuff. And then I know she goes around to other area schools and has actually talked about how cool Artsonia is, and one of the art teachers at a Muscatine school is getting the wheels going for it down there as well. You guys have anything to say?
I like Artsonia because when I forget about my artworks, I can just look back at it to remember them.
I enjoy Artsonia because it lets, if I don't get my artwork back till the end of the year, it lets my parents be able to see them and get them for like presents. Like this, we got my dad for Christmas, so it can hold pencils and pens, like stuff like that. So you're allowed to buy stuff that helps the school district.
Their school.
It helps the school with money when
Just for art.
just for art.
Do you have any questions? That is our program.
I'm guessing there might be a couple. Anybody? Director Snyder.
I'd like to know how you first learned about Artsonia.
I don't remember who was talking about it, but it was at in-service date that we had, and there was some people talking about different ways to promote technology in the art room, and I love technology. I use it a lot, and I think it's very important that the kids use it too. And somehow this website was brought to my attention, and it was pretty easy to work with.
It's pretty impressive. Thank you.
Anybody else? Director Dickman.
This is fantastic, clearly. Everyone seems very excited, and it is great that it brings it home. We always want to integrate more with home and school. I'm curious a little bit about the website. Did it say that some of the funding goes back then?
I think I get like 20%. That's not the point,
Right,
but
no.
I do use it to buy. I can get different color glazes that I don't normally get, and some specialty paper that we use for. I'm very involved with our science fair with the 4th and 5th grade, and so I use that to get specialty paper for science fair and different embellishments for that, because that's a big undertaking. So it's 20%. You know, it's not a ton, but it's enough to help out. So.
And yeah, that's fantastic too. Then I'm assuming that the website doesn't have to have advertisements or anything on it too, so that we're not bringing commercialization home.
Right, and it's all secure. Like the kids they all have their own screen name. It's their first name and a number. There's no way you can find out their last names. There's no way you can contact the parents. All the comments have to be approved by the parents. So I can't go on and, say something negative about anybody's artwork. The parents okay it before it gets published.
Thank you for doing this, and thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Director Crumwoody.
Go ahead, if you had something. Oh no.
We aren't going to be done.
No,
for a
we've
while. Just hang
we've
tight.
only just begun. First of all, I want to thank all you boys and this young lady here for your presentations. Man, how articulate you are, and in sharing this program with us. And I want to thank the staff at Bluegrass and also the parents. And what a great communication tool to parents and to their families and friends around the country. I think this is just phenomenal. And it also, I'm not a real techie person either, but it gives me more confidence in how we can better use, we have a lot of technology in this district, but how we can better use technology to do these kinds of things. And I just think it's a great communication tool, and thanks for sharing it, and keep up the good work.
Anybody else? Director Kluhl.
Well, technology is coming at us at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and some of it's good, some of it's not so good. But it's great to see that we're starting to use technology in a way that is applicable in our classrooms. And what is most exciting to me is that we're breaking down the walls of the school building. And now, you guys, when you do work at school or you do fun at school, not only does your teacher see it, mom and dad can see it, your grandma and grandpa can see it, even though they're in a different state. So everybody's right there in the classroom with you. and they sound pretty supportive at this point. So I think it's great. And I was looking at the number of hits on the on your school website, 237,000. I don't know what a normal hit for school websites is, but that seems extraordinarily high to me. So I think you've engaged the community in this process. You've expanded beyond the walls of the school building, and I'm very enthused about it. Thank you for your initiatives.
Anybody else? All right. Just a couple really interesting things to me. You talked about, I wrote it down as intellectual property rights, but you were talking about rights to the artwork. When that, and you said you had at least 2 students that had those rights purchased. When those are purchased, does the student get any of that?
Yes, they get it all. It's their work. So I am contacted by a publishing firm, and they ask for permission from the parents. There's legal forms that the parents have to sign, and there's usually some type of monetary exchange because they're buying the student's artwork to publish. So I think the first one it's like $100, and then they got a copy of the textbook that has their artwork in it, and it's happened twice now. So it's a pretty neat thing, and the parents okay it and everything, and they have to sign the form. So if they don't want their child's artwork published, then it's a no-go. So,
Sure.
But they found the artwork for their books from Artsonia. That's what they found it through the website.
Yeah. No, that's just so cool, and I figured they must benefit somehow, and I love it. I mean, that gets into business and everything else. Another question, though, let's say I wanted to buy 100 of those pencil holders. Can just anybody go on if they knew the student? Is that how it's tracked?
I believe so.
student,
I
or-
don't know much about the fundraising part because I don't participate in that. I'm just like, I just kind of put the artwork on and everything like that. So as long as you know the student's like screen name.
My mom purchased the quilt squares to make the quilt from Artsonia. I had nothing to do with it. It was a total surprise to me when she did that. But I allowed her to sign up with the program, so once she signed up, she can purchase whatever she wants on.
I can go on any school, like Tony Ryder from Adams. I know he puts a few of his students' works on this website occasionally each year also. He doesn't go as in-depth as I do. These kids, every piece that they make for me is on here. But I could go to Adams Elementary, and I wouldn't know who the child is, but I could pull up artwork, and probably, I would guess I could actually purchase from the site with some other student's artwork on there too. I just wouldn't know who it was.
All right. What's that? Oh, excuse me, Luke.
I just want to say all of us are going through it right now, and they're really good.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Anybody else? School board members? I was just going to say, my degree is in chemical engineering, and so I had a lot of math and science and all that stuff. But all of this reminded me of elementary school and art class. And I got to say, I really enjoyed it, but I think I would enjoy it even more if I were in your class. This is really, really cool. So thank you very much, Mrs. Graham, and thank you, Mrs. Simmons, for the presentation, or for the showcase. Thank you very much.
I do want to say that Kason's father is also our math teacher for 4th and 5th grade, Mr. Kurtz. But thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Bluegrass. We'll move on to a presentation, which is the first place winners of MediaCom Thinkers Throwdown, and we've got Richard Schwab, a senior area director at MediaCom. If you'll come up and make the presentation.
thought there was more than 4 of y'all. My name is Richard Schwab. I'm from Mediacom Communications. Every year we do a television show called Thinkers Throwdown through all the high schools in the Quad Cities area. And these gentlemen and young lady won this year. And I'd like to go ahead and present them with the first place trophy, have them come up and tell themselves a little bit about themselves, and also a check for a $1,000 scholarship. Gentlemen. Thank you very much. Come on up and introduce yourself, tell them the school, and say hello. Come on in.
Hello, I'm Pablo Hockey. I'm a senior here at Central. And the Thinkers Throwdown competition is a televised tournament in basic trivia and sports, science, pop culture, and history. And so we went through, was it 4 rounds? Four. Yeah, and there were 16 schools from all around the area. I think we faced Rock Island, PV, North Scott, and it was a lot of fun. Good school pride events, and it was nice to also come out as the champion. So thank you very much for honoring us.
I'm Graham Atkinson. I'm a junior at Central. I think that Thinkers Throwdown is a really fun way to apply what we learn in the classroom and outside the classroom to something that we can participate in. And it's a lot of fun. It gets our brains working. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Josh Mostart, and I'm a senior at Central. And it's I really like Thinkers Throwdown because I always tell like my grandparents, my family members about the Scholastic Bowl that we're in, and then they can actually watch me do it on the television. So that's something that's kind of nice about Thinkers Throwdown. Plus, you know, going into battle with these guys is always fun. So.
I'm Luke Urey. I'm a senior at Central. Thinkers Throwdown is definitely a lot more intense than any of the other competitions we do, just because we know we're on TV and people are watching, even though it's not filmed live. And the other member of our team who couldn't make it today is Emma Van Voren, who is a junior.
Very talented group of young adults here. If you've ever seen Jeopardy, it's just like that. It's almost embarrassing if you're an adult watching them, because the kids are just boom, 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 boom. And the adults are like, what? Slow down. So I just want to say thank you one more time and present them with the check and take a quick picture with them. Gentlemen?
Move around so you get a good picture wherever you want them. Just tell them.
Oh, this way? That way. Oh, Jackson's fine. Here, you can hold the trophy. You tell me. Here, I can take a picture.
Oh, that's okay. I
Is this your school? Yeah, we already had a check there. So, all right. Well, that's all I have tonight. So, thank you very much. You guys hold on to the trophy and the check, and we'll get the rest from you later.
All right. Thank you very much.
It also goes towards our fantastic tag department. So very gracious.
That's great. A lot of good stuff there. Makes you smile. We'll move on with our meeting. Communications Director Dickman, would you please read our upcoming events?
I would be happy to. March 2nd, we have a Committee of the Whole, 5:30 at the ASC Jim Hester Boardroom. March 3rd, the Legislative Advocacy Committee will be at 3 p.m. ASC Executive Boardroom. March 4th, Policy Committee, 4 p.m. ASC Executive Boardroom. March 9th, regular meeting, 6 p.m. ASC Jim Hester Boardroom. March 16th, Board Self-Evaluation from 5 to 8 at St. Ambrose Alumni House. March 16th through March 20th will be spring break. March 23rd, there will be a regular meeting, 6 p.m. Jim Hester Boardroom. And March 30th will be the Pro Start Dinner at 5:30 at the River Center.
Great. Thank you very much. We do have one open forum request tonight. Open forum is a time for members of the community to give input at a board meeting regarding school district issues or concerns. Individuals who want to speak should fill out an open forum request and give it to the board secretary prior to open forum. The board will not act on any issue presented during open forum if it was not published as an agenda item. The Iowa Open Meetings Law prohibits action on any issue that is not on the agenda. The president will set the amount of time allowed for individuals to speak during open forum. The board asks that no charges or complaints be made against individual employees of the district or community during open forum. Remarks that reflect negatively on the character or motives of any person will be called out of order. We have one request, which is from Annette McCarthy. Annette, you'll have 2 minutes, and come up to the microphone, give us your name and address.
Good evening. I'm Annette McCarthy, 1312 West 43rd Street in Davenport, a proud retired teacher from the Davenport district. And I keep track of a lot of issues. I want to preface my concern, the topic of my request, with saying that I'm very, very much in support of your actions to try to find additional funding for the amount per student. I'm aware that it comes from a reserve fund, but I'm sure you would do it responsibly, and anything that can assist us with keeping our programs as healthy as possible is very much appreciated. The thing I want to address this evening is to raise your awareness of vaccinations and what might be needed for adults in the school setting. We are so concerned about the children, we're concerned about rubeola. My experience is with rubella. I contracted rubella back in the 60s, my first pregnancy, and it cost us our first child. It's a very easily transmitted disease. The MMR vaccine, all they talk about is rubeola, the measles. Rubella is a viral condition that is very easily transmitted, completely different from rubeola. One article that I provided to one of the board members is from LA. It's from AP, and it talks about one of the LA schools having a rubeola outbreak, and they had interesting information about the students, but nothing about the staff. And I think that it's up to us as adults to also know our own immunity. We should be responsible not just for seeing what our children have, but for our own selves. This was not available when I was teaching in the 60s. There was a worldwide...
I'm sorry, your 2 minutes are up, but can you just wrap it up in a statement?
Certainly. Basically, people want to think about certain diseases being eradicated. It's all statistical. It's all still here. So any further information, I'd be glad to participate. I hope that the district will take some initiative in looking into this issue. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Annette. And always we appreciate people coming forward and bringing any of these issues to our attention. So thank you. We'll move on to the consent agenda. May I have a motion?
Mr. President.
Director Crumwitty.
I move the consent agenda as presented by the administration.
Thank you. Is there a second? Is there any discussion? Director DeFau.
I'd just like to add that this is the time of year when we start seeing retirement notifications coming through, and there always meet that with mixed emotions because you see so many names that you recognize, people that may have impacted your own student's life, and there are a couple individuals on this list tonight, though there are more than two that definitely have had a significant impact on my children. I would like to just comment, Mr. Steve Andrusik is retiring from Adams Elementary after 33 years of service, and Jen Betker, who was the physical education teacher there, and both of them helped shape my children in their youth, and I appreciate their service, and they'll be missed.
Thank you. Is there any additional discussion? All right, we'll call for the vote. Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
Director Hayes.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director DeFow.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding approval of bills?
Mr. President,
Director Kluhl.
I move that the following resolution be approved by the board as recommended by the administration. The resolution is as follows. Resolved that all claims presented to the board, having been duly certified as correct by the secretary, reviewed by the administration and board members, and they are hereby audited and allowed as just claims and warrants drawn on the treasury for the several amounts. Further resolved, the payment of claims and salaries be approved as presented for the period of February 5th, 2015 through February 18th, 2015.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Director Snyder.
I have a couple questions. On here, there's a listing for Pleasant Valley Community Schools for $91,284. That description is parent transportation. What in the world is that?
We do have to provide payments to parents for transportation when the students are under open enrollment. And so that would be, I would assume that would be reflective of that case.
Okay. Then the other question I have is, there's a bunch of them that are under non-employee, athletic, and other. And I don't know what that category is.
I am assuming that that would be coaches that we have that are not district employees.
Okay. But they're small dollar amounts.
That's for, like, when they rep, when they do refereeing.
Oh, the officiating.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any additional discussion? I want to go back to the, was it Pleasant Valley parents? So when you say open enrollment, are those students open enrolling into Davenport? And we're paying for their transportation in? I sure wouldn't think it's that we're paying for transportation out.
I would have to pull that bill listing to actually see what the documentation is that's attached. I'm just assuming that that's what it's for.
Okay, if you could check, because that
Yeah, absolutely.
that would alarm me if we were paying transportation out.
It alarms me either way.
Yeah, but I think there's some legal issues there. So, any other discussion? All right, thank you. We'll go ahead and take the vote. Director Kluhl?
Yes.
Director Dickman?
Yes.
Director Crumwitty?
Yes.
Director Snyder?
Yes.
Director DeFow?
Yes.
Director Hayes?
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll go to the superintendent report.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know that board members will probably mention this later, and that is our Get on the Bus trip that happened last Monday. And I just want to mention two aspects. One, we had 2 busloads of students who gave up a day to go to the to talk to the legislators. And secondly, appreciation to the Legislative Advocacy Committee for the board. Director Kluhl and Director Crumwitty have done this for years, and it's because they continue to volunteer to do it and use their energy and time. So I do appreciate that. It was a great day, and again, I'm sure they'll mention a little bit more later.
Move on to other items requiring action. May I have a motion regarding approval of plans and specs for Central High School auditorium and natatorium?
Mr. President?
Director Kluhl.
I move that the board approve the administration's recommendation on the plans and specifications for the central auditorium and natatorium.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
We will now hold a public hearing on the proposed project as published in the Quad City Times on February 13th, 2015. Anyone wishing to speak on this project, please step forward to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. All right, seeing and hearing none, I now declare the public hearing closed. Is there any additional discussion on this matter? Director DeFau.
Because it's an ancillary topic, but have we decided where the auto mechanics program's being relocated?
In the Palmer Shop Building. We've negotiated a lease with Palmer for the period between now and when we close the sale of the building, and we're planning to move the shop program into that building. And we're in the middle of our due diligence now, trying to get together a purchase and sale agreement to bring to the board for purchase of that building.
And that'll be relocated prior to the start of the next school year?
That's our plans, yes.
And I guess I would like to make a request. In the past, when we were looking at plans and specifications, we would have the architect present to kind of walk us through. And we've kind of strayed away from that in the last year or so. And I would like to make a request that we reinstate that procedure.
Happy to do whatever the board likes.
Okay, thank you. Any additional discussion? I didn't look at the plans and specs, but are they similar to what you've presented in the past?
Precisely. The slideshow that we last, I think about a month ago, showed you we're still 8-lane pool, warm-up lanes, 900 plus seats in the auditorium. Elevations look very much like what you had last seen. The plans will be out to bid here very soon. We're expecting to have 2 bid packages to you in April. First one for site work, and we'll get that underway, and the second one for everything else will be at the April 27th meeting, so we expect to actually get started, get the ground broke in late April.
Do you have any sense, because this is kind of the point at which we were a couple, 3 years ago, do you have any sense that it's likely that we will be within a certain budgeted amount?
Our opinion of cost remains at $18.4 million. We're actually working very hard to get that. Mr. Larison in particular made a $18 million commitment, and we think that we think we're very close. And we don't expect to have a big surprise on bid day. Our bids on Wood and Fillmore have actually been very favorable. We're under budget on both of those projects. All the conditions look good, so we're very hopeful that we're going to be very, very close to the $18 million mark.
All right, thank you. Any additional discussion? Director Kluhl.
An issue that's come up in the past was the soils there, and I believe we had discussion previously that there was no expectation that there would be extraordinary cost because of soil issues. We still, have soil tests been done to determine that yet? at
Yes,
this point?
we've taken additional soil borings. The geotechnical engineer and the structural engineer have consulted multiple times, and we've made some changes to foundations in certain places based on the soil conditions there, and we think that we have no reason to expect surprises.
Okay. And a question for Luke. If you were an auto shop, how big an inconvenience would that be for you to travel over there across the street?
Not that bad, I don't think. I mean, it's not that far. That street's not that busy either. There's a crosswalk right there.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional discussion? Director DeFau.
Can you tell us how much that lease is?
$10 a month.
And the purchase of the building will be?
We haven't got that far. We do have an appraisal just in, and I don't recall the exact number of the appraisal, but it was well within the budget. We had allocated $400,000 for the shop, and the appraisal was something on the order of half of that, the balance of which would be for some renovations and things after we close the sale.
And is there going to need to be any environmental remediation to that land space underneath where the auto shop is, or there, when we relocate it to prepare it for the pool?
We have we've taken soil borings there, and our geotech has not found any indication that there is any concern for environmental or for petroleum products or things like that.
It's an interesting question, though. You're talking about the current shop area. So in businesses, we would conduct what's called a phase one. Is that something that you would do? Is the geotechnical guy capable of doing that?
We have there are several firms that do that. We are actually doing a phase one on the Palmer Shop building. We haven't done a phase one on this property as we've owned it. We know its history since 1904 and so forth, and the explorations that the geotech has made has not led us to believe that a phase one evaluation was necessary.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. I don't know if it's necessary. The Palmer building probably is. So, okay. Any additional discussion? Luke.
Just looking at this picture, I don't see any locker rooms on the pool. Are they like going to be tucked under the stands, or are we using the old ones?
Oh no, there are locker rooms, new locker rooms, girls and boys in the pool area.
Okay, thank you. I see.
Any additional discussion? Okay, we'll call for the vote. Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
Director Hayes.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director DeFow.
Yes.
And my vote is yes, motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding approval of plans and specs for Wilson partial roof replacement?
Mr. President,
Director Snyder.
I move that the board accept the administration's recommendation to approve the plans and specifications for the Wilson Elementary partial roof replacement project.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
We will now hold a public hearing on the proposed project as published in the Quad City Times on February 13th, 2015. Anyone wishing to speak on this project, please step forward to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. Seeing and hearing none, I now declare the public hearing closed. Is there any additional discussion on this matter? All right, we'll call for the vote. Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Hayes.
Yes.
Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director DeFow.
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. I have a motion on the plans and specs for North and West High School track resurfacing project.
Mr. Britt.
Mr. President.
Director DeFow.
I move that the board accept the administration's recommendation and approve the plans and specifications for North and West High School track resurfacing projects.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
We will now hold a public hearing on the proposed project as published in the Quad City Times on February 13th, 2015. Anyone wishing to speak on this project, please step forward to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. Seeing and hearing none, I now declare the public hearing closed. Is there any additional discussion on this matter? Director Dickman.
What's the projected life expectancy on this?
These tracks generally last about 10 years.
Anybody else? All right, we'll call for the vote. Director DeFow.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Hayes.
Yes.
Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding the approval of change in board calendar?
Mr. President,
Director Dickman.
I move the recommendation that the board approve the following change in the board calendar. September Committee of the Whole meeting to be changed to Tuesday, September 1st, instead of Monday, September 7th, which is a holiday.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All right, call for the vote. Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director Crumwoody.
Yes.
Director DeFow.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Hayes.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. Move on to discussion items. Superintendent Tate, you want to lead us in a discussion on the budget?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to do this in 3 parts. I'd like for the Chief Financial Officer to talk about what she will be bringing to you on March the 9th for our budget approval, which will go to the state. And then I will discuss the prioritized list I have to balance the budget. And then I believe that we'll have 1 or 2 of the directors talk about some of the movements that we're making in the legislature to try to give us a hand. So, Marcia, if you'd like to begin.
Good evening. This evening I'm going to talk to you about a couple different issues that are associated with the budget. And the first is the budget amendment. I always kind of like to start in chronological order. First thing I'll be bringing to you is a budget amendment for 2014-15. And the reason that I bring an amendment to you is because we are limited on our spending by the expenditures that were adopted in the original budget last April. And we have to amend the budget before we exceed any of those limits. Now, we're not getting close, but it's always a good time to amend the budget when you're looking at the budget for the next year. When you approve the budget, it's approved for all funds, which for us totals over $200 million, but it's also done on a functional basis, and this is a state requirement. And so when we're approving the budget, we have to submit how much we think we're going to spend in the areas of instruction, support services, non-instructional programs, and then other. And so obviously when you do it this time of year for the next year, things can change. And maybe your expenditures aren't falling into those functional areas that you think they're going to. And so that's why we always take a look at it and then propose an amendment if we need it. And so again, there's the 4 functional areas that we have, and there's really only 2 of those areas that we need to amend the budget, and that's in the area of instruction and total other expenditures. And again, we are amending it on the high side. It's not that we're planning on spending more necessarily than we were last year, but just the functional category of where those expenditures are falling has changed. We could have actually lowered total support services and non-instructional programs because those are the areas that things have shifted from, but I just left them at the level they were, again, because it's a not to exceed. So at the end of 2015, we are projecting our fund balance to be about $29 million, and we are projecting our unspent balance to be about $6.8 million. So are there any questions on the budget amendment before I move into the budget?
Marcia, the projected fund balance, what for a district our size is this where we want to be?
Actually, I'm going to be hitting that when I move into the budget discussion and
Okay.
talk about where should we be setting our fund balance. Okay, I'm going to move into the budget for 2015-16. And again, I wanted to highlight, by you approving a budget at this point in this process, what you're doing is you're establishing the property tax levy for all the homeowners within the Davenport Community School District. It's important that you realize that we are establishing that levy. But I wanted to bring some highlights to you of what the budget is for 2015-16. It has been figured at 0% supplemental state aid, or what we know as allowable growth, for 2015-16, and that's because the legislature has not acted. We, by law, cannot set that budget at any other amount other than 0 until the legislature makes some move. Even though we know the lowest amount that they have proposed is 1.25%, we can't certify a budget at that amount because it's not been approved. By going to 0%, it puts the district in budget guarantee. What budget guarantee means is that we are guaranteed at least a 1% increase in funding over last year. So 0 doesn't necessarily mean 0, it does mean 1 for us. The teacher leadership compensation dollars are now part of the funding formula. Last year when we applied for that and it was competitive and we were awarded that, in the first year that you're awarded, it's looked at as miscellaneous income. After that, they roll it into the formula. So just so you know, when you're looking at that formula, those teacher leadership dollars are part of it. I did recommend that we reduce our cash reserve levy by $1.25 million, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. What that does is it reduces our property tax levy by 75 cents, so we're just over $15 per $1,000 of assessed valuation. I did put into the plan the reduction of $3.5 million in expenditures that we've talked about. Also, there is a reduction in our management levy of $2.5 million. And then also I have built in a sale of $10 million in tax revenue bonds. The percentage growth, again, if the legislature comes back anytime that they set it, which would, then the Department of Management updates what our funding is. So even though when I ask you to approve the budget in March, if sometime after that the legislature sets the allowable growth at anything other than 0, it doesn't mean that we're stuck at 0. The Department of Management automatically goes in and updates our funding formula, so we get whatever percentage the legislature did pass. Just an FYI that we would need them to set that allowable growth at 2% or more in order for us not to be at budget guarantee. And that budget guarantee amount is property tax funded. It is not state aid backed. And so I'm also recommending that you pass a resolution allowing us to tax for that budget guarantee, which right now is just a little bit over $2 million. So even if you would pass the recommendation or pass the resolution letting us be at budget guarantee, that still incorporates a 75-cent lower tax levy. So the budget guarantee doesn't necessarily mean that we're raising taxes because of that. We can still lower taxes, and I'll get to that in just a minute. The cash reserve levy other. The reason I have other up there is you can levy cash reserve for items that the School Budget Review Committee has approved, which we are. But you can also levy cash reserve for what they call other. And what that definition is, it's a property tax that you can levy so that you have capital in reserve for unforeseen events and to fund unspent balance. Well, obviously our unspent balance is at a level that's not a concern for us, but it did come in handy a couple of years when the state pulled our funding or underfunded us. We had to rely on those reserves to get us through. And some districts weren't as fortunate as we were and had to borrow money, but we had that money, and that was exactly the purpose for it. But right now I'm recommending that we lower that cash reserve amount other by $1.25 million. And the reason for it is we are going to have approximately $23 million in funds that we cannot spend, that we don't have spending authority to back it. There were some years that we would levy cash reserve and invest it when our investment rates were 5-6%, and that would bring additional miscellaneous income into the district, so it was really a pretty good deal for us. Investment rates today are pretty much non-existent. We get really happy if we can get 0.5% as an investment rate. So it doesn't make sense to levy dollars that we can't even get investment income off of. And I put up there fiscal responsibility. At what level do you say you have enough? And I'm saying that we have reached that level that we don't need to continue to levy for excess funds that we can't use and that we can't invest. The proposed property tax rate is $15.08. It could go down if the supplemental state aid is set at anything other than 0. The current levy does include 49 cents for the budget guarantee. That's what that $2 million equals. If we are out of budget guarantee, if the state sets it at above 2%, then state aid kicks in, and that's why our property tax levy would go down. Kind of gave you a little example, a little visual here of what it is. On the left-hand side is if we did not have a guarantee, we have our uniform levy, and then we get state aid, and then additional property tax levy fills up the remainder for our per pupil amount. But when you have a budget guarantee, you go through those 3 steps, except the top step is property tax again. So when we get out of budget guarantee, that $2 million that's now all property tax funded becomes part of the formula, and the state picks up some of it. So that's why our property tax levy would go down if we're out of budget guarantee. Just to remind you what those property tax rate components are, there's quite a few areas that make up what our levy is. The general fund, which makes up about $10.90, that's just what we get for the per pupil funding that goes through the formula. The instructional support levy is another area. The state has completely pulled their funding from that, so now it's just all property tax funded. And it used to be for every $2 you would raise locally, the state would give you $1. And that has now gone away. We have the voted PEPAL dollars in there at 97 cents. The cash reserve other that we just talked about, which is now down to $2 million. We have the management fund at $2 million. Our regular PEPAL that the board establishes at 33 cents, and then the cash reserve that we get from the School Budget Review Committee. And all of those components make up what our property tax levy is, which we're proposing for fiscal 16 at $15.08. This is just a visual to show you where we've been with our property tax levy. And as you can see, there was a concerted effort in 2001, 2002 to raise our levy. In fact, I think we raised it by about $1.50. At the time, we were running a fund balance deficit. And the board said, enough of the deficit, we've got to have some money on hand. And so they raised the property tax levy. And as you can see, it was steady for a number of years. And now we have started bringing that levy back down because of the amount of reserves that we have built up. And this is the lowest that we've been, it looks like, since maybe about 1990. Our fund balance, we're estimating at the end of 6/30, I believe I should say 16, of about $28.8 million. And so as Mr. Cool said, what is enough? Well, there's a recommended solvency ratio of 5 to 15%. Solvency ratio is just a ratio between your revenues and what your fund balance is. We're currently at 14.75%. And the board had set a goal many years ago of 5%. I did some additional digging and looked at the Government Finance Officers Association. And they say, of course, you should take into account what your specific district needs are, but that you should have no less than 2 months of regular operating revenue in your fund balance. And for Davenport, that would be $30.4 million. So you can see we're just about right there. We'll be at 28.8, and if you look at the conservative side, they could say that really you should be around $30 million. So that's another reason that I recommended that we not continue to levy cash reserves. Our spending authority is estimated to be $5.18 million. And we had a board goal, obviously, of $8 million in 3 years. And the current estimate does include those $3.5 million in budget reductions, but it also includes that 1.25% allowable growth that we were hoping that we could get. So I gave you the estimated unspent balance at the 1.25% growth, even though we're having to certify at 0. Being a little optimistic there. Here's just a graphic of our spending authority and our fund balance. Shows you that how our fund balance was going up and our spending authority was going down. Some highlights from other funds, because the budget that you're going to be approving does include other funds. Our management fund, we're reducing the levy by $2.5 million because we have an adequate fund balance there, and I didn't see a need again for us to levy additional dollars when our fund balance can take care of it. Our sales tax fund does include expenditures of $18 million for next year, and that does include the Central, the Fillmore, and the Wood projects that have been presented to you. And the other capital projects fund, I have put in there a recommended sale of $10 million in tax revenue bonds. We'll be bringing that to the board again for approval. But again, when you're certifying the budget, you always want to certify on the high side. So you still have the purview, if you will, to say, no, we don't want to do that, or we want to lower it. You can always lower your budget once once it's been published, but you can't raise it. So I always go on the high side when I present it to you. So just a quick summary is you are approving a property tax levy rate. If the legislature acts, and if it's different from 0%, the state will adjust it for us. We will be asking the board for approval of the budget on March 9th, and then the district has to certify the budget to the state no later than April 15th. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions or comments? Must be some before I get to my page of stuff. Director DeFau.
Yeah, and I guess I will make the same comment that I made last year relevant to a reduction in property tax. While, yeah, I think everybody likes to be in a position where they hear that their property tax rate is decreasing. I think once we give that up, we never get it back, or we have to go through, very significant increases like we did in the early 2000s, which I would hate to do. Given the current climate of school funding in Iowa, what's to say that we're not going to have some draconian slash in budget comparable to what we had in the early 2000s, where we're going to have to make up significant gaps. I also know that Director Kluhl and our Legislative Advocacy Committee have, submitted a proposal where we could use some of our cash reserve to make up the difference in what we're allocated by the state in terms of per pupil costs, and the fact that we get less per student than many districts in the state. And if we could make up that difference, that's about $2 million a year, as I recall, a little more than that.
The one thing I will mention is we've got the levy set at 1508 now. When the legislature, I'm hoping, sets an allowable growth rate, I said it could decrease our levy. We have the opportunity, when the Department of Management says that, to say, no, we don't want to decrease it. We'll keep it at the levy it's at, and then we just backfill it with cash reserve. So we would not have to make that decline in levy once they set that rate. So just so you know that we do have the opportunity that we can levy some more.
Anybody else? Director Dickman.
I share Director DeFau's concern that once we lower the rate, then it's seen as a tax increase if we then have to go back and make up funds. And then also, it is my understanding that the current bill that is proposed would give us credit for years past. Is that correct?
Well, there's probably never making up for the past. We're just trying to keep up to date to current time.
Okay. I guess one version that I saw would give us some years back of the $175 per student that we're missing out on or have been missing out on, and so that would give us an infusion of spending authority. And so I would like to continue having reserves in the bank if we are allowed to increase our spending authority to make up for some of the years, at least, of the $175 per student that we're missing out on.
Yeah, I think that example that you may be thinking of is we were looking at if we had been given that $175 delta over the last 10 years, this is how much money we would have had at this point.
So if we somehow magically got that done, hopefully not that magically, and we're granted the, what was it, around $25 million that we've missed out over the last decade?
That's, yeah, that's correct. But the legislation didn't mention that. It's talking about now forward. It's not to make us whole.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay.
Any additional discussion? Well, I'll say a few things then. This sounds crazy. You know, I think here we are, we're in this financial situation that we are, and we're saying we're going to lower taxes, right? That, if I didn't understand everything you said, that would be one of the craziest things that I would think you could say. Would you agree?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Good answer.
Thank you, Marcia.
No, I understand from the outside. In fact, I had someone call me today and couldn't understand the difference as to why we could be building buildings and having to reduce the budget. And I see that the same thing because of the restrictions and not understanding spending authority and all that. From the outside, I can absolutely understand that.
So when you talk about, if you could talk about decreasing the levy rate, and maybe you set it up there, but I missed it, what would it be as a percent?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, what I'm trying to do is to figure out a little bit if you're going to change it to 15.08 or whatever it was, what was it before? Let me ask you that.
75 cents higher.
75 cents.
Mhm.
And what's 75 cents in total dollars? Oh, you must know that.
Offhand, I couldn't tell you.
It's in the millions, though, probably.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because, yeah, I know we're going to almost have to do this. Incredibly difficult. And one of the other things I wanted to point out, even though I don't know when this law was made that changed this to allowable growth, if we could actually recover all of that, I figure around 40 years at $3 million would be $120 million. And that would be great. I know I'm dreaming. Okay. I want to get a little bit to the timing of all this, though. The certification is due by the district on or by April 15th.
Correct.
You said you're going to ask us on March 9th, I think. Is that right?
Correct.
To certify the budget?
To approve the budget.
To approve it. What about the actual certification?
The certification is just a matter of me filing with the Department of Management and filing it with the county.
So our approval is sufficient, and we're going to approve that levy rate that you indicated. That's really about
That's
it.
what I'm asking, yes. And that is what we will have published notice of in the paper on Friday.
Yep.
Is the levy rate at that $15.08. Now, if you were to decide that is not what you wanted to do and you wanted to go higher, then we would need to republish the budget at a higher rate, and then that would put off your approval of it probably till the next meeting in March. Because we have publication requirements that we have to
So
meet.
if we were going to do that, we really should be discussing that at this meeting. Is that, I mean, timing is going to be,
You would have another opportunity. You could actually approve the budget the Monday before April 15th,
Mhm.
which we have done in the past. So, I mean, there is some time in there if that's what you desire.
there is time, but I think the administration has also asked that we kind of expedite this decision for a number of reasons,
Correct.
right?
Right, because we have other deadlines
Right.
internally that we have to
Yep.
meet.
So I would encourage the board to, if we're really going to think about doing anything other than the recommendation on this levy, we should be discussing it tonight, I think. You also talked about the teacher leadership, and you said after the first year it was rolled into the formula.
Mhm.
How does that happen?
It happens at the Department of Management and by the districts that have had the TLCS money approved. The first year, it's looked at as a categorical funding source and it's miscellaneous income. And then the second year, they just automatically put it into the funding formula so that after that, the amount increases with the amount of allowable growth that the state sets.
And how much is that right now for us?
A little bit over $5 million.
And I thought there was a limit on the number of years of that. Is that correct, or does that go on?
There was a 3-year application process for districts to come into the system, but after that, I've not heard that there's any limitation. And in fact, it would seem just the opposite, that if they built it into the funding formula, it's a little bit more permanent than if it were just an outside funding source that you'd had to apply for.
All right. Any additional questions? Director DeFoe.
Have you calculated what the unspent fund balance would be after next year if we kept the tax levy rate where it's at today?
The tax levy rate really doesn't impact the unspent balance because the taxes that we're levying through the cash reserve don't have spending authority with it.
And I missed the cash reserve. What we're currently going to be at 28 million
in fund balance.
In fund balance. What would we be if we didn't reduce the tax rate?
That I don't have. I'd have to go back and figure that for you.
Because I'd be interested in knowing what that difference is.
I could probably figure it while Dr. Tate is presenting his portion of the budget and have that answer for you.
Okay, that'd be great. Because I would say at this point in time, I'm reluctant to reduce the tax rate myself personally.
Director Hayes.
Now, did I understand you to say when you lower the rate, the tax go up?
No. When we lower the property tax levy, the taxes that the homeowners pay goes down.
Okay.
If the budget guarantee goes away, then the property tax would lower because the state picks up more of that money. It doesn't all fall on the property tax owners.
Anything else? Director Dickman.
What is the disadvantage of keeping the tax rate where it is, besides the fact that the rate would be a little higher for property owners?
I don't know if there would be a disadvantage. The fact that we are levying dollars that we can't spend is really the only thing I think that is associated with that. I mean, there comes a time when when you've got the recommended, how much should you have on hand, which, we're real close to that. And so how much do you go over that and still be able to defend that? That's why you're doing it. So I don't know there's a disadvantage to that. But.
Right. Well, I know that we have some parents and students that are working on advocacy with the board and the legislative advocacy committee to give us permission to spend the money that we have on hand. So I would like to continue to have that money on hand if their efforts are successful, and I think if we get enough people on board that we will be successful.
Director Crumwoody.
I certainly agree with Director DeFaw. I think if we change that and reduce that, it's going to be very, very difficult for the public to understand what we're doing. We're sitting up here saying we have this huge financial problem, and trying to understand school finances is so difficult. It's difficult for us as a board and the public when they hear these things, just like you were talking about the money for the construction. It's like, well, that's a different pot of money. And now if we come out and we're going to communicate saying we're going to lower your taxes, but we might have to close schools. It's like, what is going on? So I would be very concerned about doing that.
Director Kluhl.
It's very true that this is hard to understand. When you're undergoing deficit situations and wondering where you're going to find your next meal, why are you giving away a tax levy? In fact, I had a member of the Board of Supervisors ask me that same question. I said, when you're in a situation, why would you reduce your tax levy? And so I spent some time trying to understand this recently, and I think our CFO is recommending a very fiscally prudent process for us to take. I know that as we'll talk about the bill that we're proposing later, but one of the things that the legislature has continually pointed at school districts at is saying that you're carrying over a projected fund balance beyond what's reasonable. And I think what Marcia is proposing is that we don't reach that point where the legislature will look at us and say, what are you carrying over these sums of money for? Now, as Marcia said, if the investment environment were better, that would change. But I think it's just fiscally responsible for us to pay attention to what this fund balance is. Now, if the public doesn't understand it, and if the Board of Supervisors doesn't understand it, I'm sure the public doesn't, but that's going to be an educational process for us. But for us to act in a way that's other than fiscally prudent, I think would be improper.
Additional discussion. You know, recently I haven't thought that the legislature was particularly reasonable themselves. And so if they're telling us 0% or 1.25% is reasonable, then I would question their ability to understand what reasonable means. And I think that fund balance recommendations and what Marcia showed was that the one recommendation from whatever that organization was that we should have $30 million anyway. And that was kind of, I don't know if that's on the low side. We had a 5 to 15% in one of the recommendations, and you had $30 million in the other recommendation. And so right now I just don't have that warm fuzzy feeling about our legislators' ability to tell us what to do. But I wanted to go somewhere else. In the other category, you said something about what we could use that for. And I thought, is there any way for us to use that to help us fund what's going on with our budget?
You can use the dollars as long as you have spending authority to go with it. So like if we had an unspent balance of $35 million and we said, well, gee, we have all this unspent balance built up, let's use some of it. Then you would use those cash reserves to fund that. Or the time when the state pulled the funding from us. They let us maintain the spending authority, they just pulled the cash. So in order for us to get through those months when we didn't have state aid coming in, we had to pull on those cash reserves to pay our bills.
So that was an other without spending authority.
Correct.
Is there any way to ask for other than through spending authority? Is there a way for us to, and I don't know if it would be a bill issue, if it's just, I don't understand that part.
You can always go to the school budget review committee because they're the ones that give you the spending authority. When you go to them, you have to ask for something that is unique and unusual. And that's their definition of, it has to meet that criteria in order for them to allow you that additional spending authority. We go to them for the excessive cost associated with our ELL programs. That is something that they themselves had defined, that districts that have those programs, the cost associated with that are unique and unusual, and so they will give us spending authority for that. We went to them once before and were turned down because it was not unique or unusual. If we could find some way that we could qualify it as unique and unusual, we certainly could go to them and ask for that authority. We would have to make a very good case.
Is there any particular timing requirement on that request?
The school budget review committee, I believe, meets 3 or 4 times a year. And there's an application process that you have to go through, and your board has to approve the resolution to apply. But there are dates that that would, be an opportunity for us.
But theoretically, if we came up with some idea of how to address it, we could go and ask for other, and we could ask for maybe $4 million or something.
If we could justify it as unique and unusual, sure, we could go to the school budget review committee and ask for that spending authority.
Is there any other discussion? I'm going to ask for consensus here in a minute or so. We need to be able to give the administration some guidance as they prepare the levy amount for next Monday, right? Or no, it's 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yep. So is there any additional discussion? Director DeFau.
Mrs. Tangen suggested that she could determine the dollar amount that we would have in excess cash reserve if we kept the property tax rate equal while Dr. Tate was doing his presentation. So I would like to ask that she get the opportunity to do that before you ask for consensus.
Okay, great. How long will your part take?
15.
All right. Is there any additional discussion or questions for Marcia before we move on to the superintendent? And then we'll come back to you. Anything else? All right, thank you
All
very
right,
much,
thank you.
Marcia. We'll move on to the superintendent.
During the Chief Financial Officer's presentation, she mentioned several times that we are building a budget predicated upon a 1.25 increase in supplemental state aid, which would require that we reduce next year's general fund by $3.5 million. And that's in order that we don't reduce our unspent balance anymore, and we actually build it up as requested by the board, so we'd be at $8 million in 2 years. So I provided you a draft reduction plan, and this one is prioritized. We've been talking about this since last April. We talked more seriously through the summer and the fall. We've listened to a lot of people provide us with ideas. I've listened to the board many times, and this is the plan which, based on what I know now, that I would enact in order to make sure we have a balanced budget and to make sure that we're building our unspent balance fund. Notice I've given a running total so that we can see the impact of different state supplemental aids, which you can find on the bottom, showing the reductions required based on whether it's 1.25, 2.50, 3%, or 3.25%. So at the very top, I've got early retirement, and we have applications which equal $836,000. We have just gone out and reduced the requirement, and we're waiting to see how much additional that we will get. So that's why I've got the 836 plus in that column, and we're expecting to get more people to come forward. Utility savings I've increased to $150,000 because we're almost set in reducing the summer schedule to a 4 days a week, 10 hours per day, and we'll save about $75,000 should we do that as a minimum. We talked last time about moving some of our maintenance contract to the management funds and also reducing department budgets by 5%. Curtailing professional development and reducing the needs for substitutes, and eliminating administrator annuities for new hires and one administrative position. We're transferring 2 instructional coaches and 1 reading intervention to different fund sources, specifically the modified allowable growth and special education, so we can take them, we'll still have the positions, but we'll take them out of the general fund at that time. And on the very bottom, then, we have reducing teacher positions. I've got 4 at the elementary school. We would take first, then 6 at the intermediate level, and then 15, up to 15 teacher positions at the high school level. I want to point out that the elementary level, we're not actually going to have to increase class size because these are coming from normal reduction of the number of students in our elementary school. So this would be our normal staff function. When we get to intermediate and then at high school, we will have to add 1 or 2 students to many of the classes in order to achieve that. My hope would be that the state would come through with something like 2.5 or 3%. We'd have a lot of people going for early retirement, and we'd be able to draw those lines somewhere before the intermediate schools, or perhaps right in the middle of that, and not do the high school positions. Why have I put the high schools last? That provides the most problematic challenges to us for replacing teachers or making sure they've got the right certification. And so, again, we would try to not do that, and we could work more with our intermediate level because many high school teachers have the certification for the intermediate positions, but in some cases intermediate teachers could not teach the high school level. So at the current time, this is the way that I would make the reductions, and we're really just waiting and see what we get in the way of supplemental state aid, and again, how many extra people we have who come through with early retirement.
Are there questions or comments? Director Snyder.
On the teachers and instructional coaches and interventionists, we actually have some numbers to look at, but we don't have numbers on the administration side. It says administration reduction in positions by attrition. What does that picture look like number-wise?
Well, that's 1 administrator that we're talking about with the 125. And I've also, in future years, indicated that we would attrit administration positions. It could be that we do 2 in 1 year, but what we have to do, we have to see who is retiring, and then based on who's retiring, exactly how we can consolidate positions. So I'm not consolidating positions first. I'm really saying who's going to retire, what opportunities do we have, and then we'll make the moves.
Director DeFau.
To follow up on that, I mean, there was in our consent agenda today an early retirement from the district athletic director. Considering that that may be the position that you assume will not be replaced, have you given thoughts to how you would restructure that, or have you even gotten that far? Are you still thinking that there may be other administrative positions that seek early retirement?
I think there'll be other positions, although each time we know someone's retiring, we get together, we've got a lot of plans that we can use, but I'd rather see the entire picture so that we can know that we're making the right choice.
Okay. And I guess what I would say in that regard is, given the scope of athletic programming in our district and knowing that building ADs are acquiring other duties as assigned based upon the reduction in building budgets, I mean, I know that's happening. I have concern that if those duties were going to, if there was an effort to pass the duties of a centralized AD down to the building ADs, that would be very complicated to accomplish.
We've certainly given that consideration, but realize no matter what happens, you're consolidating positions. There's going to be somebody doing more than they've been asked to do, no matter how that looks. But that certainly is something that we've thought about, and we do understand the complications involved with that.
Anybody else? Director DeFau.
I'd just like briefly for the administration to speak about the high school reduction in teaching positions, if that would occur. We had some conversation about a month or so ago about how that would impact curriculum, and I just would like that to be reiterated for the public.
Yes, Mr. Scott?
In the reduction, we have talked with all the principals and had discussions as far as when we know what basically hand that we're going to have. At that point, we may have to share teachers. Teachers may have to travel, and that'll be a lot of coordination on my part of sharing from high schools to middle schools. One of the advantages of our bell time adjustment is our high schools and middle schools are closer than they have been for several years. And so we are sharing staff currently from some of our high schools to our middle schools, and our middle schools are sharing, but that's going to be an effort on my part. Do we have classes, when I looked for this year, that are running with the size of 9 to 12 kids? We have very few of those, but those could be impacted. And how can we collaborate between buildings to continue to have those classes open? We have had classes over the years that have been an every other year class. We've done that in the past. We try to stay away from that just because of the complexities of a student schedule. And but the sharing of staff, I think, is the first course that I will be working with all the principals. I don't know if that answers exactly what you're...
It does to some degree. I think there was conversation at that last meeting that you did not intend to cut curriculum, but rather find ways to, offer it perhaps in a different delivery method. So I guess
right.
That's what you're talking
We're talking about even early bird and a fifth block schedule. Excuse me. And looking at those options. But again, a class may have had 4 sections of it where 20 kids in a class. Now we may be at 3 sections, and there may be 24 kids in a class, 25 kids in a class. Those may be some of the restructuring, so there would be more kids in classes. But I think really my first avenue is how are we going to be able to share the staff, because that's really where we get in the certain certifications of the high school teachers and needing to teach a certain subject, and it's easier for them to drive than to transport the kids. I found when we transport the kids, we're not as successful of them taking the classes. We move the teachers, we have more success with that class still being offered.
I guess I would just caution that system works well if you retain a block schedule. But, you know, the minute there's a conversation about modifying from block to a traditional schedule, then you lose that flexibility and that there's less opportunity to travel. And knowing that Dr. Tate still has that as a year 2 recommendation, I think we just need to be mindful of future impact if we are in fact going to use that as a way to curtail cost.
We currently have that where it curtails a little bit with the ninth grade academy at West because they're on skinnies, and that impacts a little bit of that. And also North is on an A-B schedule. So we've given them the freedom to do that to best meet the needs of their students, but that may be something that we have to discuss in the future.
Any additional discussion? Superintendent Tate, was that as much as you were going to present?
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you. Then I guess we can go back to Marcia, if you're ready.
If we would keep in the 75 cents, it would bring in just over $3 million.
Putting us at 31.
Yes.
And is there any reason why we could go anywhere between where we currently are, basically, and your proposed rate, right? If we wanted to be somewhere in between?
You could, or you can actually go higher. I mean, it's totally up to the board as to where they want to establish that rate.
Okay. Director Dickman.
Something that I think it was Director Kluhl said about that the state might say that they think our cash reserve fund is too high. Well, I think if they tell us that, then we should just tell them that our supplemental state aid, or whatever it is they're calling it, is too low, and that if they would give us the permission to spend the money on our students because we value our students, that cash reserve fund wouldn't be so high.
How many ways can we say that?
Director Crumble.
Well, I'm glad Director Dickman said that because, you know, this is really, every year it gets a little bit more depressing, I think, not only for us as board members, but for the staff and how we how we try to operate our schools, and we get less and less every year. And, you know, as a legislative advocacy committee and as board members, we've talked to legislators, we've gone to Des Moines, and now I am, and we are as a board, pleading with the public that you need to get more involved. This is pretty depressing, and I don't think people are really aware of how serious this is and what we're going to be giving up in our schools. We have a great school district, and right now we're operating on just the bare essentials. Yes, we could increase our class sizes and have 30 kids in our elementary classes. We could do that. But our children are not going to get the education that they need. So I am pleading with the public and all the media's here tonight. I want you to put that over the media and say, come on, folks, wake up. We got some serious problems. And just like Director Dickman said, we've got this money in the bank. Legislator, just let us spend what we have. And you don't have to come up with more than 1.25%. Just let us spend what we have. So if you would do that, we would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Marcia?
I just wanted to correct a statement that I made earlier about saying that you could set that levy at any rate that you wanted to. We are actually held that between our cash reserve levy and our fund balance, we cannot go over 20% of our expenditures. So I just looked it up, and given where our fund balance is now at $24 million, the maximum amount that we could levy between the two cash reserve levies is a little bit over $9 million. So as your fund balance goes up, they look at that and add in it the cash reserve levy, and you can't exceed 20% of your expenditures. So it's a built-in formula that the state has.
Additional discussion. Director DeFau.
In looking at Dr. Tate's recommended savings, at this point, prior to any additional early retirements, you're at $3,281,000. If we have 1.25% supplemental aid, you're still saying we need to reduce 3.5. Now, I know under budget guarantee we get 1 million or 1% of that, but there's still a gap. There's a gap of 219,000 between your total savings and where you say we need to be at 1.25. And if we have to cut an additional 0.25, what is that number? So what is our true gap between what's being recommended and where we would need to be if we are in fact at 0? Do we know? So this, in fact, is a more positive outlook, if you can say having to cut $3.2 million is a positive outlook. We actually are looking at even more serious cuts than that if we're at 0, which currently, if the legislature does not act, we have to presume 0 growth.
If we are at 0 growth, we will still be guaranteed 1%.
Right.
At 1.25%, we're still guaranteed 1%.
Right.
So I take back, there would virtually be no difference between 0% allowable growth and 1.25. Either scenario puts us at 1% growth because of the budget guarantee. So the reductions that we said we would need at 1.25, we would need that same amount at 0% because of the guarantee that they have in place.
So we still have a gap of $220,000, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
Anybody else? I gotta go back to spending authority a little bit. So, if we had the same spending authority as, I'm not sure what Pleasant Valley's is, but let's say we could, if we had another $175 of spending authority, and that would work out to be right about $3 million, just a little under, and the way that the current law is structured, that money or that authority is given to those districts generally, and they have to raise the money through property taxes, right? And if we, right now, the money that we have in reserve is generated from property taxes. And it feels almost simple, and I know we can't do it yet, but theoretically, could we, if we could get the legislature to say, you got the spending authority, $175, we could cover that probably through our reserve indefinitely, because it would continue to get replaced through our current levy, right? And, okay. So I'm going to ask the Legislative Advocacy Committee to work even harder. Director Kluel.
Well, this is maybe a discussion that should be conducted in the Legislative Advocacy Committee, but we're talking about a bill, and I think Superintendent Tate's going to bring that up later, so I won't talk about it now. That's we're on? Okay. The thing about the funding formula is that it is inherently inequitable. So what we're talking about, well, let me start from the very beginning. For the last decade, the Legislative Advocacy Committee has been writing to legislators. We have been holding ice cream socials with legislators, building up relationships. We have created grass nodes, write-in campaigns, and you know what? Over the decade, I don't think we've seen any action as a result of our efforts. And so we sat around the table, Legislative Advocacy Committee, and we said, what else can we do before we move to South Dakota and start farming? And we came up with the idea that if we could, in fact, create a situation where there was no Peter to rob from, no Paul to rob from, that we could probably create bipartisan support on behalf of the legislature. So we came up with this. And I know some of this has been confusing to you tonight as the board has talked about some of these issues. But in fact, the statewide funding formula was created in the 1970s. And the reason that the legislature created this funding formula was because all the districts in the state were at that time funded from local property tax 100%. Some districts are wealthier than others, and so they obviously put what they could into the school districts, which was more than property poor districts like Davenport could do. The legislature said, no, this isn't right. We need to create equality in this funding formula. So they actually created a very good funding formula in the 70s, which created more equality amongst school districts, but it didn't create entire equality. What they said is those districts that have been historically funding more to their districts, we're not going to make you come down to the base level that everybody else is at. You can continue to pay up to a delta of $175 more per student. Now, had they sundowned that legislation to say that in 10 or 20 years we will all be equal, it would have been fine. They did not do that. So we're left 40 years later with an inequality, a funding formula that is inequitable. And that needs to be addressed. Now, every 5 years the legislature gets together and they address this funding formula. They did that this year, and I can't say that there was any move towards making it more equitable. They kind of hedged around the corners of it. They said, let's get together and talk about this again, but never did. So it's going to be another 5 years before they get back to talking about the student funding formula. So the fact is, the formula is inequitable as it exists. What we're talking about with our bill is saying, okay, we have a $25 million fund balance. We have that money. It's sitting there. We can't spend it because we don't have authority. In essence, it's like a credit card. We work at the behest of the legislature. We're their creation. So they tell us, look, here's a credit card. You can spend up to this amount. Not over, up to this amount. Doesn't matter how much you've got in the bank, how good you've been at trying to protect your programs and create a fiscally stable program, you can only spend this much. So our bill, which we believe will gain bipartisan support, will ask the legislature for allowable growth up to $175 per student more than we're getting. And if you include the weighted formulas and the modified allowable growth, that comes to about $3.2 million a year. Now, we could sustain that, as President Johansson said. We probably could sustain that, but the fact is we look at this as a short-term fix to an inequitable situation. The formula needs to be fixed. But in the meantime, our kids can't wait because we're talking about $9 million of cuts the next 3 years. We can't wait for them to come around 5 years from now and talk about it again. We need action now. So it was the Legislative Advocate Committee's proposal that we go ahead, draft a bill, and we submitted that bill to the chair of the Senate Education Committee last Thursday. We had a chance to meet Senator Cornbach while we were down in Des Moines on the bus trip, and he agreed to accept that. And so right now, what we're waiting for is for a study bill number to come out of the Senate Education Committee, and we're hopeful that that will happen very soon. This is not only for the Davenport Community School District, but all districts that have a fund balance that could be used, that's sitting there, not being used, that our legislature, our parents, so to speak, have not allowed us to touch. So it's simply asking for the legislature to give us the authority for funds that we already have. Not more than the $175 per student, just $175 per student. Again, $3.2 million a year. So I just wanted to clarify the fact that, yes, we could do this on an ongoing basis, but there's an inequity that the legislature needs to take care of directly, and that is the funding formula itself. So this is a short-term solution that we've tried to create because we have short-term real problems.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Any additional discussion? I want to say two things. One is that based on what you just said, my confidence level in the legislature just went up to 100%, and I'll maintain it at 100% until we find out the disposition on this request. The other thing is that when I look at the past 40 years, and that was probably short term to the legislature, and I'm thinking short term for us could be 10 years. And maybe within 10 years, I would have 100% confidence that the legislature could adjust the funding formula on a permanent basis that would be equitable. So, thank you for making me feel a lot better. Any other discussion? All right, let's get to where we've got to be for the administration. We've discussed all of this. Everybody has had a chance to think about it and debate it. And Linda, I'm going to, I'll call on you last so that you'll have a little bit more, because this is really, really big. It's one of the decisions that we make that affects almost everybody in our community. So what I'm asking for is not necessarily a number, but I do want to get consensus on where the board is so that the administration can make an appropriate recommendation on the levy rate on March 9th. Marcia?
If you are going to change the levy rate, we will need to republish, and then the board will not have the recommendation come to them until the 23rd. That would be the earliest that we could bring it back to the board.
But we can't really make a decision tonight on this. Would we need to have a separate meeting? And when would you have to publish?
We have, I was just looking it up. If we come back to the board on the 23rd, the earliest we can publish is the 3rd. The latest we can publish is the 13th of March. Our timeline has expired for republishing for the meeting on March 9th.
But what I'm asking is if we had a special meeting, could we somehow
We still
get,
couldn't bring it back on the 9th.
excuse me?
If the levy rate is going to go any higher than what's being published on Friday, then it will have to come back to a meeting it will have to come back to the board meeting on the 23rd, because we would not have an opportunity to publish again to fall within the timeline of the requirements.
But the publishing won't happen until this coming Friday?
Correct. But we have to give the Times at least a week lead
Really?
time.
We can't push it? We can't say please?
I don't know.
Okay, all right. So the board understands that we have some timing concerns here, but we have some real concerns on the levy rate. So, and I'm going to ask then, in order of seniority, because those more senior board members have had an opportunity to go through this more frequently. So the order that I'm going to ask is Director DeFau, Director Kluhl, Director Crumwitty, Director Dickman, Director Snyder, and Director Hayes. All I'm asking is, would you like to stay where we are? Or would you like to, are you inclined to stay where we are with a levy rate, or are you inclined to accept the levy rate recommendation that was made by the administration earlier this evening? Director DeFau.
Well, I hate to correct you, but in deference to my senior counterpart, Director Kluhl has been here a modest amount longer than I
Wow.
have.
Well, I appreciate that correction. I was unaware of that. I'm really sorry. So we'll reverse those two. Director Kluhl. You were really unaware of that. Yes, I was.
Marcia, could you explain, I'm looking at the chart that you had on spending authority and fund balance, And you don't have access to that, but it shows that, you know, our unspent balance, of course, since 2006 has been on a downward slide. But it shows our fund balance leveling off very nicely at about $28 million. And that's given that, did we decrease the levy rate last year too? We did. So I'm seeing it leveling off, which to me is where we want to be. And I know pictures are probably misleading, but it shows it where we want to be. But it would seem if we were to decrease our levy rate, that we would start to drop our fund balance. Am I correct?
If we decreased our levy rate, we could have the fund balance go down, but with the levy that I've recommended, we would still maintain that $28 million fund balance, and that is because of the reductions that we're making.
Okay, the reductions. All right. Well, in that event, I'm satisfied that our CFO has studied this way more than any of us ever will, and you know, like I said, the work that I've done recently in trying to understand how the levy reserve goes into the fund balance, I'm satisfied that this is the prudent thing for us to do fiscally. So I would support the CFO's position.
Which is to decrease the levy rate.
The levy rate as she is indicated,
All right.
yes.
And excuse me for interrupting our thought process here, but student board members, we've been really engaged in this for a while. Do you have any thoughts, comments, questions before we continue this consensus up here at the board?
It's a tough issue for them to get involved.
Okay, all right. Thanks. I just wanted to make sure I had gotten back to you. Director DeFow.
I would not be comfortable making any reduction in the tax levy rate at this time.
Director Crumwitty.
As I spoke before, I think it would be very confusing to change it at this time, and so I would be opposed to reducing it.
Director Dickman.
I would be significantly more comfortable staying at the current levy rate.
Director Snyder.
I too would be more comfortable leaving it right where it is right now. There are just too many unknowns and too many scenarios to play out to leave any money on the table.
Director Hayes.
I too would like to leave it as is.
And I also would nod in favor of maintaining the current rate for a number of reasons. And I do think that the total amount that was represented by Marcia, the $30 million, which seems to be a reasonable floor from the recommendation that she had. And I do believe that, like I said earlier, I have 100% confidence right now in the legislature, and I believe that you, or not you, but our legislative advocacy committee will probably get the short-term spending authority, and I think within 2 years, it's likely that we'll have gotten the legislature to change the funding formula. So.
Yeah, I'm not clear
Excuse
on
me?
what you said.
Oh, I said I'm in favor of maintaining the current levy rate
Oh,
and
that's
not
what you said.
decreasing.
That's what he said.
I believe I did.
He used a negative.
Anyway, I'm in favor of not decreasing it. How's that?
Okay.
All right. So the consensus, as I read it, of the board would be to leave the levy rate where it is. I know that causes a little bit of timing issues, but you've got that under control, Marcia, right?
We'll see what we can do.
Okay.
I mean, I find it hard we can't just get them to change that one little thing. We got 4 days. We'll work on that.
Yeah, and if we need if there's anything the board can do, if we need a special meeting or something.
We don't need a special meeting, just be more time, but we'll let you know.
Okay, great. Then I believe we're done with this discussion. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. We've been at it for 2 hours. We're going to have a 5-minute recess. And then we've got one more subject for discussion. It's on board culture. And then we should wrap this thing up. Thank you. All right. We'll resume our meeting. And boy, I got to tell you, that last discussion took it out of me. Well, I appreciate that offer, but that probably wouldn't be appropriate. I don't know if it's blood pressure, but I do feel really worn out after all of that. So we'll move on to the discussion on board culture. And there have been a number of requests that have come in on a variety of different types of things that happen on our board, in our board, because of our board. And so I've asked Director Dickman to start the conversation on this subject, and then we'll get into some of the specifics. It's mostly just an exploration. Where does the board want to be when it governs itself? Director Dickman, you want to take over?
Sure. So I wrote a small novel here because I've been known to forget what I was what I started saying by the time I got to the end of what I was saying. So I hope you'll bear with me here. I love being on this board. I've had so many opportunities to learn and to have gotten a chance to know so many people who are working so hard to make our community a better place. I understand that I've caused this issue of board culture to come to a head by sometimes overstepping my bounds and challenging the way that things are done. But everything I have done or attempted has been with good intentions, with the goal of doing what is best for the district and its students. I hope that I can be forgiven for being overexcited about a curriculum because I read about it in an education reform book, in a neuroscience book, and a book about long-term success as providing significant long-term help to students who are traditionally the most disadvantaged. I hope that I can be forgiven for being uncomfortable with an issue going unresolved even after intervention from the administration and trying to be part of the solution when regular channels have not succeeded. I hope that I can be forgiven for feeling a sense of urgency. I have pushed, sometimes unrealistically, to have the board and administration work faster. I've made no secret of the fact that a big part of the reason I ran for this board was to make the change I want to see. And honestly, I would like to see that change in time for my daughter and her peers to benefit from it. I may not have the same reverence for current processes as some other board members do, but I see that as a feature and not a bug of my service on the board. I will not blindly accept any information, but I have been chastised for trying to do my own research if it crosses the line of me reaching out to ask a question. I want to have a feeling of how board decisions will play out for students and staff that can only be gleaned from talking to people that really experience the ramifications of board policy. I will not renounce who I am that made me want to run for this board. Yet I've been told multiple times that other activities that I participate in compromise the board in some way. In Davenport, we are so fortunate to have a diverse community with diverse viewpoints, and it is each of our jobs to advocate for what we think is best for students and our district. Currently, what I find instead is that I am afraid to act because I can barely even ask how to find the best channel to suggest an idea. I fear we are being hugely ineffective as a board and a district because of bottlenecks and information silos. For example, I wanted to reach out to other board presidents from surrounding districts to get their thoughts on what board members should do when pursuing an idea that requires a bit of research before it would be ready for a full board discussion. But instead, I was told I needed to put in a board request for that information. That information is not available for discussion tonight because of having to go through a request instead of allowing me, as an individual, to seek out information that I could then share with the board. For another example, I saw a story about sex ed being woefully inadequate in many schools and wondered if there was even a way to bring up sex ed or health requirements without being subjected to a lengthy explanation of how I am a board member and need to stay out of management. The same thing for wanting to ask our dropout prevention team if we make accommodations for students wanting to pump for their babies. If that accommodation is already being made, then there is no reason to bring it up. But if it is not, I would like to at least know at what level that decision is being made. We as a board still have not talked about what we learned from IASB, even though there were tons of shovel-ready ideas that have proven track records of improving outcomes for students because there is no prescribed place to discuss ideas from other districts. Lastly, I have made numerous mentions to Dr. Tate and members of the school climate committee about the importance of keeping suicide prevention efforts strong because that is important to me. Am I overstepping my bounds by keeping an issue I feel is important at the forefront of conversations, or should I ignore my personal history and experiences because the rest of the board does not seem to care as much as I do? I understand and appreciate the fact that there is a line between staff and the board. I hope that we can always trust our staff to follow directives and implement plans that the board decides on. I also hope that board members will not feel like their hands are tied and their mouths are taped shut because of the rules of governance. With that, I would like to open with my first philosophical question. Is this a proactive board or a reactive board? And should it be proactive or reactive?
Any discussion on that question? In fact, this is going to be a discussion on culture, and there are a lot of things that go into this, and there may be discussion on some of the issues that you brought up. How many questions do you have that you want to discuss?
I was going to leave it open after that.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you. Is there any discussion on that particular question? Is this a reactive or proactive board? Anybody? Director Kluhl.
Well, I did my presentation on policy governance because and having, as you mentioned, we've had no discussions of the ISB learning opportunities that we had in Des Moines, and that's something that Director Crumwoody and I and Director Johansson have all said, look, we go to these things and we hear all this wonderful stuff and we see what other people are doing. We're excited about it. We come back to the board table like many board members do to many different boards, and after a couple weeks, we're back to business as usual. So I certainly agree that we haven't captured some of the learning opportunities that we've had. And as I suggested during the policy governance presentation, I would like board members to speak up. I think that we have a book that Director Sherwood has ordered all for us, a poverty book, and I think that there's an intent to start sharing that with other board members and perhaps have discussion on that. But is this, back to your question, I'm sorry, I digress. I think the board is, I don't like the word proactive because it's, in addition to being overused, it's also ill-defined for the purposes that we often use it. I think we are too reactive, a board, but I don't think we're very much different than many other boards. And so I would like to have us become more acknowledge the issues at hand that our general public has for us to deal with, which I think that we have been remiss in doing. And in that regard, I would like to leave the state that we're in, which I don't think is bad. I believe that this board, I've seen a lot of changes in this board over time. When I first got on this board, I didn't know it, because when you're first on the board, you don't know what you're getting into. But as I look back on it, it was a rubber stamp board. Whatever administration said pretty much around the table, that's what we did. And I didn't realize that at the time, but only in time did I come to reflect on that. But having been through many boards, I believe this board is very knowledgeable, very tolerant of opinions. Could we be more welcoming? Could we do better? Yes, we could. But I don't think we'll ever be in a position where we couldn't do better. So, for what it's worth.
Anybody else? Director DeFau.
And by observation, I would say that I think that Director Kluhl's definition of change and how you would implement a policy governance model is quite different than what Director Dickman is talking about, because yours is even more hands-off than we have been, where you want to focus externally and not internally, whereas some of the things that Director Dickman has recommended since her tenure on the board have been more directed internally, and how to try and manage curriculum or perhaps personnel decisions. And I think one of the hardest things for me to understand when I came to the board, because I came with a passion and enthusiasm that was the byproduct of advocating very strongly and vehemently against building closure, to the extent that I was a litigant against the school district at that time. And, went to Des Moines and participated in an administrative hearing where we sued the board and the school district. So to be painted as someone not as passionate or as caring as you, because I have different style, I take issue with. That being said, the hardest thing it took me to realize is that when I go out into the community and speak about issues within the district, that people interpret what I say as being the opinion of the board. And I do not represent the board. I represent my own self as a member of the board. And I can't tell you how many times in the last 12 years I have prefaced a statement with, in my opinion, this is what I believe, because I know that my audience most often is thinking that I am representing the board. I've had the media take issue with me many times because I adhere to our own policy, 90201, which states that the board president is the official spokesman for matters and actions of the board. And a statement from an individual board member shall be considered a statement of that board member only, and should not be construed as reflecting the position of the entire board. Like I said, because because a statement can be made in innocence, and then all of a sudden there's a rumor out in the community that we're going to be, cutting athletic programs from certain buildings, or that, we're going to take some other drastic measure. It was a hard lesson for me to learn, a very hard lesson.
Anybody else? Director Crumwitty.
Like Director DeFau, it was, first of all, after working in this district for 35 years as a teacher and a central office person and a principal, it took me a long time to really figure out my role as a school board member. And the Iowa School Board Association has helped me with that, and I've been a strong advocate of that organization ever since. And still today, I'm sure some board members feel, well, he's speaking his principle piece right now, and so I've tried to advocate for things over the year that I really feel strongly about. I feel very strongly about preschool, for example. You're going to hear me in another week about my thoughts about preschool. I'm very passionate about some issues in education, and so I do bring them up. But I try to, and I have asked, when I first got on this board, I asked Director Kluhl and Director Johansson, I said, you know, if I'm stepping out of line or going someplace where I shouldn't go, will you kick me or throw something at me or just let me know that that's not my role as a school board member? So I've tried to be more careful, but yet those things I'm passionate about, you're going to hear me talk about. Next week, I'm going to be quite passionate about this poverty issue. And Director Kluhl mentioned the book. Bill Sherwood and I agreed that this board needs to be, you know, if we have a priority of combating poverty in our schools, well, what are we doing about it as a board? We have a priority on a piece of paper, but what are we really doing? And so I'm going to be asking that this board take time to do a study of this book. I've already asked Mary to send out information about some training that's coming up, because I think we need to have a better understanding about what poverty is even about. So I am going to be passionate about those kinds of things. But I do think there's a fine line between our administrators' responsibilities and our board responsibilities. And I think about that every once in a while when I'm speaking and thinking, maybe I went a little bit too far, and I wonder what Dr. Tate thinks about that, what I just said. So I try to be somewhat cautious, but I'm still going to be passionate about those things I believe in. I've got 7 more months to be passionate, and I'm going to try to get some things accomplished in those 7 months, and I will be talking a lot more. I think we do need to be more proactive. I think, and Director Kluhl has talked about this for a long time, are we a learning board? Are we really taking time to learn? We go to the Iowa School Board Association conferences and some of the other workshops around, but are we really having those conversations together here at the table? And I do think this board needs to be more proactive in this way. But like Director Kluhl said, and because I've been in this district for so many years, I've seen some boards that really, really struggled with these issues and board culture. And Director DeFaul mentioned one situation, but I remember other situations and other lawsuits that took place at board tables. And I don't want this board to ever get to that point, because it's bad for not only the board but for our school district. And as you travel around and talk to other people in other school districts, they would say, well, oh my gosh, what's going on in Davenport with all this kind of stuff, you know? So I think we just need to be more careful. We need to be proactive in our beliefs, and we just need to figure out the right channels and how to get things done. And I think we did when we set our 2 priorities recently. I think we're on the right path, and I think under those 2 priorities we can do a lot more, and I think we can be more proactive in those issues, which hopefully will make a difference for our students, not just student achievement, for all of our students in our Davenport schools. So, and personally, I want to thank you, because I think you've brought a different flavor to this board also, and I admire your work, and and your passion also. So we just need to figure out a way how to work together.
Anybody else? Director Snyder.
I actually think we all work together pretty well. We all kind of have different backgrounds. I share a lot of the same unknowns that Director Dickman has. I've been on this board for a year and a half, and there's still things that I learn every day. You know, how do I get this information? How do I request it? How do I learn this? Yet, how do I do it without stepping on anybody's toes? You know, I understand as a board our responsibilities, our policy, our responsibilities, our budget, finance. I'm a floor covering distributor during the day. I'm not an educator, so I can't really think of anything more offensive than me trying to tell an educator how they can better do their job, so I don't want to cross that line. But two, running for the board, you know, we all have passion. We all have things that we believe in, things that we'd like to see. And, you know, I would hate to see a board where people didn't advocate for the things they believe in. Otherwise, a yes sir, yes ma'am kind of a board, I don't think is going to really accomplish much of anything. I think this discussion is good to have to get things out in the open. I think we do work well together, and I think going forward, we've got a lot of horrible things that we're going to have to address and deal with in regards to this budget. And I think our diversity on the board, as well as, you know, from a background standpoint, from education to everything else that we have going for us, I think is a plus. And as far as reactive or proactive, I think we're a little of both. I think we're forced to be reactive on some occasions and try to be a little proactive, but again, that word is so overused and generalized that you know, I don't think we're going to be one way or the other all the time. But I do appreciate this conversation, and I think together we can continue to learn and keep going.
Anybody else? Director Hayes.
I too appreciate this conversation as being one of the newest member on the board. Everyone has their own different flavor. Everyone has been so welcoming to me. Within my first week, everyone has come to me in their own way, offering their services, trying to get me kind of caught up, and I feel that I've actually entered into the board at one of the down periods. So I feel if we can get through the down period with the budget, I think everything will work out better. You, Director Dickman, you were, prior to my even coming on, you were accommodating and helpful. Director Quamwitty, you've offered to be my tour guide. Director Cool, you're helping me with this legislative stuff. President Johansson, you have been there for me when I need it. Not that you're the best at returning messages, but you've always been there. Dr. Tate has been accommodating. Director Snyder has helped me. Director DeFaul, everyone has been, you know, really, really accommodating. And I feel with the diversity and with all the backgrounds as well, I feel that this team does have quite a bit of unity.
Director DeFaul, you have something?
It always makes me smile because I think about the administration's perspective and think of the major issues we voted on in the last several months in regard to the recommendation for moving to traditional schedule, which we did not do, the modified school day, which we modified ourselves before we approved it, the request for a property tax levy, which we rejected tonight. I mean, we are not a bobblehead board. I do believe that we are a thinking board, that we are very deliberate in our decision-making process, and I see that as a value added to us. And I also appreciate the candid conversations that we have at this table, because Another thing that I think is the most challenging thing to do as a board member is to remain open-minded and to not make a decision about a pending vote before you come to the table. And I can't tell you how many times that in conversation, I've been persuaded to vote differently than I thought I would as I was coming into a meeting. So I think that's a synergy we have. I think that's a value added. And I appreciate the fact that people are willing to have respectful disagreements at this table. I think that's a value added.
Anybody else? Director Snyder.
I'm going to actually go as far as saying I think other boards could actually learn from us from some of the discussions we do have. We go to the IASB conventions and different things, and they'll go on about how they have some meetings that drag on for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And, you know, and then when we tell them, wow, that's our first restroom break is after 2 hours. You know, I think as a board, because of our different backgrounds and I'm not afraid to dive in deep, we pick things apart to where they can't be picked apart anymore. And I think as a board, we do a great job looking at all the angles. And I think everybody at this table is key in that because everybody has different areas that they're strong in and believe in. But one thing I would absolutely say is I know for a fact that every one of us is passionate about the kids, and that's why we're here.
Anybody else? Yeah, although I still haven't said anything, but go ahead, Director Dickman. Huh? Mm-hmm.
I do think that this board does a phenomenal job discussing issues when they are brought to us. The start times is prominent in my mind as an issue that we aired out every possible thing that that needed to be aired out before we made a decision. I think the area where I find frustration and where I think that we are lacking perhaps is bringing new ideas in. I know I do a lot of reading. I'm sure many other board members do a lot of reading where they might run across an article or an idea or something along those lines. And I know many times we'll forward articles on to administration. Are we going to forward on a whole book though? And so when I get an idea like that, I've tried to find ways to bring up the topic. And I think part of it is being a stumbling new board member and figuring out my way through the administrative jungle, I guess. But it has felt like there's been more pushback than is necessary against bringing in new ideas, and I think that's where my frustration has been.
Anybody else? I'll address your first question on proactive, reactive, and I don't like the way the question is phrased because it suggests that you're one or the other, and I do believe that it's hard to even understand what a definition is of proactive. I'm trying to think about what your thoughts are on proactive, but I think about this board and the responsibilities, and Director Snyder talked eloquently about them as being primarily finance and policy, and that's really about it. And we have two employees. One is the superintendent and the other is the secretary. And so generally, that's where our communications are going to go, is through the superintendent. And when I look at what we've done, I think especially in the area of policy, I think the policy committee, and especially with the leadership of Director DeFau, has done just an outstanding job. And when you look at some of the tough issues that committee has taken on, really in a proactive way, where we're looking at policies that haven't been even considered by most boards in the state and probably by most boards in the country. But to understand how this affects our district and our employees and our students. I think that with respect to finance and policy, which are the two primary requirements, I think they're spelled out in Chapter 20, aren't they? I've looked before at board responsibilities, but I think those are the two called out by the legislature as our primary responsibilities. So I'm going to agree with most of the people on the board here that I think we have to react to certain things. We are out in front in a lot of cases. But I do believe that we're a pretty cautious board by the same token. And we do think about things, we bet things. I thought this evening's discussion on budget was very fascinating to see what the board did and to see the difference in perspectives. When I was interviewed by the TV stations, they said, why did this happen? And oftentimes I'm asked that, and I said, who knows? You know, there's 7 different people up there with 7 different reasons. So I'll leave it at that. I do have some additional comments, but I'll wait until later. But that, I just wanted to address your first question. So the floor is yours again.
Well, I guess the other issue is I was told when joining the board that it was, as Director Defoe pointed to in the policy, that it was the board president's duties to speak to the media on board related issues, and I've abided by that. But there are also activities that I participate in outside of being a board member that have absolutely nothing to do with education, and sometimes those get media coverage. So where does is there a way for me to still be that same person who goes to events and might be on camera talking about some sort of progressive issue that is not related to education? And does that get conflated with the board speaking because I was at an event or a rally for something that was unrelated to education?
Anybody? Director Defoe.
I don't think any of us would suggest that you should give up other activities or interests that you have in the community as a community advocate. I mean, it's probably one of the reasons why you were elected to serve. By the same token, yeah, again, it's that same exercise of caution that you're not serving in the capacity as a board member when you're at those functions. You know, I can't, anytime I'm in a building, and people know I have children still in the school district, anytime I have to go talk to a teacher, an administrator, the school counselor, I preface, you know, I'm here as a parent. I'm wearing my parent hat today. I'm not a board member, you know, and I think just erring on the side of caution and making sure that people recognize that you're not there in an official board capacity. I mean, all of us lose a certain bit of our privacy when we become board members because we do have that public persona. And yeah, as just part of being a board member, to, you know, our families lose that element of privacy. I mean, I could tell you stories. I won't, but I could. I mean, I had. Well, my husband was accosted, and that's not too strong of a word. When we were talking about the change in the school calendar and the calendar in terms of when school started and stopped. Literally accosted and yelled at, and he said, I was fearful. This person was so out of control because he knew I was a board member. And my children that have been subjected to bullying in school because of a position I've taken at the board table or a conversation that's occurring at the board table. And, that's been 12 years in running, where it's been an experience for them. And sometimes one that I regret for them, that they've had to endure some of the things they've endured. But I gave that up. I gave up that element of privacy when I became a board member, and they did too. So it's a balancing act. I overcompensate when I'm in those other arenas to make sure people know what my role is.
Anybody else? Director Crumwitty.
And once again, my experiences have been very similar. I've been in I've served as the principal in 6 different elementary schools, and as I look through that retirement list tonight, probably at least close to 50% of those people I have worked with, I have supervised. And when I go into schools, and when Linda takes me up on the offer when we go, I'm sure, because I hear it all the time when I'm walking around with Director Kluhl or some other board member, it's like, they worked for me, or they worked with me. But I try to be really careful about what I say. And again, to let them know that what I say comes from Ken Crumwitty. I'm not representing the board. But I also say, I will listen to you, and I'll listen to your concerns. And I have, over the past 9 years, I've had many teachers and many administrators who have bent my ear on certain issues. And if I thought that I needed to pursue that, then I would go to the superintendent and say, this is what I heard. Now, maybe you know it, maybe you don't. But these are the issues that are out there. And, I've had people come to me and say, well, I have a real issue with that principal at such and such a school, and you've been a principal, and I know the people liked you, and so why don't you come in and sit with me, and we'll go through this together. It's like, oh, no, that's not my role as a board member. But I listened to them, and if I thought it was something I needed to share with Dr. Tate or previous superintendents, I would certainly go to them and say, I just want you to know what I've heard. But that's hard, and you do. You give up privacy. My wife just retired a couple years ago. She's taught in this district for 42 years. She's still a substitute in this district. Same thing with her. They'll come up to her and say, why did Ken vote that way? I remember the boundary discussion, and I had some pretty strong feelings about the boundaries. And she got bombarded in some of the schools about, why does he thinking that way? It's like, he's the board person, not me, But, yeah, you do give up privacy, and it's a difficult situation. But I do, just like it's been said, I think we work really well together. And, but we do need to improve.
Anybody else? Director Kluhl.
Well, Director Snyder mentioned that we all come, I think, with a certain qualities, certain abilities. And I don't think that passion is probably a quality, but the last thing that I think we would ever want you to do is give up your passion when you came into this building. I'm an environmentalist by training, and one thing that bothered me a couple of years ago, still bothers me a lot, is the amount of salt that we put on our roads here in the Quad Cities, which all eventually, goes where? Right into the water that we drink from. And so I sent a letter to the editor, and I said, look, this concerns me. I think we could do better. Interestingly enough, that was used by the city, directed to me, saying, well, if you're going to tell us how to do our business, perhaps we should tell you how to do yours. That was improper, because as a citizen, I have a right to speak my mind. Had I indicated in that letter that as a school board member I disagree with what the city's doing, it would have been another matter, but I didn't. I wrote as a private citizen because I have a passion about those issues. So, I think it's important that you remain passionate. But I think some of the areas that you've stumbled up against are learning experiences as a new board member, and we all learn as we go in this world here that we're in. So don't give up your enthusiasm, and I know that you won't. But never think that I don't want to see that enthusiasm. I mean, this article that I shared with you is one that we share an enthusiasm about, but I think the rest of the board is not on board with us, and that is the ubiquity of bubble tests and standardized testing that we inflict on our children. Well, interestingly enough, and I won't start this conversation, but on the coast, they're starting to rebel against that. Here we are in the mid-states, and we're going to be catching up eventually, but I'd like to move out ahead. And I think that there are ways that you and I can work together, perhaps with the Agenda Committee, again, to take time to get in front of the board and say, here's some ideas I've got, like I did with policy governance, like Ken's going to do with the Poverty Committee. I look forward to doing that, and that would be an outlet for your passion, and I would appreciate it.
Anybody else? I'll say in this particular issue, I think especially because when any of us get out into the public, and Director DeFau was talking about it for a bit, but the most of us are recognized as being board members, and I think that we all look at the work we do here and the work we do outside of here differently. But this board is a nonpartisan board, and it is supposed to be thinking generally in a nonpartisan way with respect to what's going on at the board level. When we do things in a partisan way outside of the board, and then if, again, almost like Director Kluhl's mentioned there of the salt, you know, it was interpreted by the paper, or I'm sorry, by the city, that he was representing the board talking about salt. And we had a really tough relationship with the city for quite some time. And no, not because of that, but we did. And we've continued. There are stresses between the district and the city, but there is also a lot of cooperation. And so I think that one has to be especially careful, and especially around the media. I have one of my sisters-in-law is she's a campaign advisor for Democrats only in national races. And she used to write for the Chicago Sun-Times. And she gave me some advice once about working with the media, and she said, when they ask you a question, don't engage them. And if they keep trying, don't engage them. I don't necessarily believe that, but one of the things that she pointed out is that the media is not necessarily interested in doing something really good. Oftentimes they're looking for some sort of divisiveness. They're looking for a story, and they're looking at it from their perspective. And so we value the media here. We really do, and I think we have a great media. They've helped us out in a lot of ways. But I think we all have the obligation to be careful. If we're outside of this environment and the media asks us a question, and especially if it's a partisan event, I think we have to be very, very careful about what we're going to say or how we're going to interact with the media. And I don't know if that addresses your question, but that's one of the things. And I don't know if you actually seek out the media or if they seek you out. But it's just a strong caution from my perspective that you've got to be very careful with the media. Anything else? Floor is yours again.
I appreciate that that strong caution, and as I mentioned, I am learning. I know that at least 2 members of this board have run for office in either the Democratic or Republican primaries. So I think we all have to leave any partisan ties back at home, I guess, when we sit at the table. Coming out of this conversation, I would like to see some sort of structure, because we all are passionate and we have things that we've brought in, and Director Sherwood would always talk about environmental issues, and he would bring up environmental things. Director Kluhl mentioned that too, and we're both passionate about the testing issue. A regularly scheduled time or avenue to communicate ideas that we find that might not fit into an article that we can forward on to the superintendent, because it is very frustrating when you see something and you say, wow, that would be perfect for Davenport. I wonder if that's something that we are doing or if we would look at. And I don't know everything that's going on in the district. I don't think anyone knows everything what's going on except in the district, except for Dr. Tate and some of our executive directors. And I do feel disadvantaged in some ways because other board members have had children go through the system or they've taught in the system. And so they have a better understanding of the internal processes. And so just some sort of method to be able to reach out to find out just process-based questions and what could be addressed at the board level and what to send on the information to administration and see if they want to do anything with it.
Anybody want to address that? Okay, I will. Again, we do have processes, and we have, you have direct access to the superintendent and to the secretary. And there are going to be occasions where you may talk to one of the executive directors and ask a question, things like that. And so when you have a great idea, you have an article, you have whatever, you may want to direct that to the superintendent. You may want to sit down and talk with the superintendent. And the superintendent, as far as I have seen, is always willing to talk with any of the board members. We also have some, not extreme, but very, very careful consideration of the Iowa Open Meetings laws. And generally, what we have asked as a process is that if you have an article that you want to share with the board, that you not share it with the board, but that you share it with Mary, the secretary, and ask the secretary to go ahead and pass the information out. It's just a sense of being really careful, because the Iowa Open Meetings laws have been violated by some school districts, and you can get into some pretty deep trouble doing that, even though it may not appear. But if you, for instance, were to send it out to 3 other board members, and you can start asking a question, hey, what do you think about this? And pretty soon you're into a discussion on that may affect a decision later on. It's just, and I've always thought that Director DeFau's admonitions over the years, and sometimes we all catch ourselves. So all of a sudden there'll be 4 of us sitting there talking. You go, whoa! And somebody will walk away, you know, because we can get into some trouble there. So, but if there's a question, I would ask, I think you can ask any of the more tenured board members. You can always go to the superintendent. You can always go to Mary. Beyond that, I would just be really careful, because when you go out if you go to the schools, and we encourage going out to the schools, but we don't encourage going out to the schools to do an investigation. And so those are parts of understanding management's role and understanding the board's role. Did you have anything else? Director Snyder.
I have one thing on that, and that was one of the things that I had to learn real quick when I came onto the board, is that reply all is not your friend when you're a board member. Because as soon as you hit reply all, you're violating open meeting laws by communicating with all of them. And I still see that on occasion. And I think as a board, as a whole, that's one thing that we really all need to watch. Because that's something I violated frequently when I first came on, and I don't do that anymore.
Any other discussion on this? I've got a couple of just other kind of thoughts on this whole thing. So generally, what we try to do is to do things as a board or on behalf of the board. And so we have a couple of committees. We have the policy committee, and we have the legislative advocacy committee, and we have the can't even think of
Climate.
well, the local school advisory committee is actually a committee of the board, but by representatives in the community. Oh, and then the agenda committee. And we're preparing to have one more committee, the ad hoc committee. Oh, and then we have the
Poverty and climate.
Yeah, and climate committees. And frankly, because of what's going to happen in the next 7 or 8 months, you newest board members are going to find yourselves being asked to participate more and more on those committees, because they have to be filled. We don't have to have 3 people on the policy committee, but it has been really, really nice. So the passion, and I've talked with you before about your passion, and I think everybody here has a lot of passion. I think thinking outside the box is really important. I think being revolutionary is important. But unfortunately, we still have these rules. And so generally, I would suggest getting consensus, even with if it's with another board member, like Director Kluel. If you two have something that's really important, and go through our process of requesting information and agenda and all this stuff, and it does take time. There's no question about it. But when you do things on behalf of the board that another committee should be doing, or the board should be doing, or the board should be aware of, then you'll get tripped up, and that will be messy. And so I would advocate again that anything that has anything to do with board stuff, run it by somebody else. But you always have the superintendent, you always have the president, the vice president, and everybody else. One of the other things that I just want to talk about, because it is something that you had requested, was that we consider the tools of the mind. And the administration spent considerable time looking at it, and they said it wasn't for the Davenport district at this time. And the sense that I got is that you are unwilling to accept that from the administration, and that's kind of where we cross over into management, and we all may get into that at sometimes. But then I think you had changed the request to talk about curriculum, and it was intended that be part of tonight's discussion also. But why don't you talk a little bit about how that happened, and let the board talk about how much influence should we have, especially as individuals, on a specific curriculum.
I mentioned it briefly in my opening statement there that I continued to run across this curriculum that had also, we always talk about research-based and everything like that. So I was shocked, I guess would be the correct word for it, when the administration came back and said that they didn't think it was for Davenport. And so, as part of being a new board member, I wanted to continue pursuing the idea. I do think that the board, not necessarily specific individuals, but that the board should be aware and have discussions with the curriculum specialists periodically during committee of the whole meetings or something of that nature, to get a feel for what philosophical direction this district wants to go in. Like with the testing, there's the kill and drill style of learning that's been promoted lately. And I feel like that's, if nothing else, that the board should be aware of what's going on in our curriculums, because that is the most prominent thing about our district. That's what, the kids go home and tell their parents about. This is what I did in school today. That's their curriculum. And so that's what I wanted to change the discussion to, was what can we do to have our voices be heard about what philosophy we have on education. And I know some of the board members are not interested in education policy, and they can skip if they want, I guess. So I will open it up.
Anybody want to address this? Nobody? Oh, Director Hayes.
I guess I'm somewhat confused. If our primary focus is policy and budget, how does curriculum get involved with that?
It doesn't get involved with policy or budget. Well, I guess it does sort of get involved in policy in kind of a roundabout way. It's the board gives direction. Those are the primary purposes of the board, but the board has given direction on many things that are not at all related to policy or to finance, and part of it is the board just being aware. Maybe I'm alone in feeling that way, and if that's so, then I guess I will respect the wishes of the board. But I do think, there was a school district, I can't remember where now, but they passed a resolution to opt out of standardized testing or not do something. Do you remember? I forwarded it on to Director Kluel, and I asked if that's something that the Davenport would ever consider, because it was a school board. And so there are areas of crossover.
Director Hayes, did you have more to talk about?
I guess
there?
I'm clear on that, but from my short tenure here, it's to me, it almost seems like we have more pressing issues. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, your thoughts, your passions, but it almost seems like we need to direct our focus on what's mandatory and leave the other for later. That may be a closed-minded thought, but I just feel, in comparison to that with the budget, that's minute when it comes to the budget. And I just feel that, if we're in our own lanes and working towards what our directives are, that we would get further with it, rather than crossing over and bringing in something that's really not a key element right now.
Anybody else? Director DeFau.
And as you describe asking questions and learning more about curricular philosophy and things of that nature, that is something that I can be supportive of, and be a willing participant in talking about those, because the board our role is to give direction to the superintendent, and we do influence, probably more than we even know, how decisions are made behind the scenes. But to recommend specific curriculum when none of us, with the exception of Mr. Crumwitty, have a degree in education, and to presume because we've read some affirming statements about a particular curriculum that it would somehow fit in Davenport, we do not have the benefit of the big picture. I trust that the superintendent and our executive directors have a vision for our curricular goals and the strategies they want to implement so that all students can be successful. And in fact, that's a measure of Dr. Tate's job performance, is how well he's meeting those standards and how well students are achieving. Our role is to hold him accountable for meeting those goals. Our role is not to tell him or our staff, we really would like you to critique this curriculum and consider implementing it. Because, again, just as the public sees us and takes us as representative of the board, so do staff. And when we bypass the process and we don't use the superintendent to inquire and we go directly to someone, and then they feel compelled to act because we are the board. And then suddenly there's a lot of work going on to meet an expectation of a board member or the board because we've made an inquiry. It's that balance piece, and that's, I have always found that if I have a question that I can go to Dr. Tate, and he's very responsive. Obviously our agendas are stacked enough that when we have agenda requests, they're not always going to be at the next committee of the whole, I am sure that the agenda committee has a list of topics as long as our arm right now to try and sandwich in on top of everything else we're doing with budget and things of that nature. So, and I think we've proven ever since I've served on this board, that we're an impatient board, not just with our staff, but with ourselves. I think every time we've done a self-evaluation, it's been, why haven't we accomplished more? And that's one instance where we're very critical, and instead of reflecting on things that we have accomplished, we're much more apt to look at things we haven't achieved. Once I did an evaluation, facilitated a board self-evaluation, and we graded ourselves D- that year. I don't know
It's
if
been
anybody
before I-
remembers. I think this is
Must be
before your time.
Before I might got on the board.
Yeah, so it was a long time ago, and it's like, well, this didn't work out too well. But I mean, we're our own worst critics in that regard, and education doesn't always move as fast as we would like it to.
Anybody else? Director Crumley.
I just want to comment on that topic of curriculum, because if you think you struggle, I really struggle with that, you know, and just, I don't know if you recall, just in the last few weeks, we've had people talking to us about the reading curriculum, and, you know, the reading curriculum's up for adoption, and now the structure that they want to put in place, and I'm sitting here thinking, just a couple of weeks ago, we heard about from one school in their showcase how great this curriculum is that they're using, and now are they going to give that up if this committee of people decide, well, no, this is what we're going to do district-wide? So I really struggle with that. So I hear what you're saying. But then I always have to remind myself, it's like when Julie Sazesky comes forward and makes a presentation, or any of the reading people in the district or math people or whatever, when they come forward, they're really the experts in that area. You know, I have, again, working in the school for so many years, I think I know a little bit about it, but things have changed. And I don't think it's my role to say, well, has your reading committee thought about this? I think my right channel would be to, if I find something that I really think, man, this is working in a district very similar to ours, then I would take that to Julie Sazesky, and I would say, here's some information that I found, and then whatever she does with it. But I think those are the kinds of things that I have really struggled with on the board. Because when people come forward, and we're in Committee of the Whole, and they're talking about curriculum, and they're talking about structures in the school and so forth, it's like I almost have to bite my tongue sometimes, because I'm afraid I'm going to interject some of the things I shouldn't be interjecting, because it's not my role as a board member. And it's hard for me to take off my principal hat sometimes. So, but yeah, but there's channels, and it's taken me a while to learn that, but maybe in a few months I won't have to be concerned about that anymore.
Director Clue.
Ken and I have attended a couple of recent early childhood retreats, committee of people, staff members working on early childhood issues. And boy, you sure look like Sadie tonight. Was she like your twin when you were that young? I think you could have been twins. Your facial expressions are so much like hers. Anyway.
I have my tongue out all the time.
Well, we appreciate, or you don't slobber nearly as much. Yeah. But we went to this early childhood retreat three times now. And I think it would behoove every board member to go to a meeting of staff members where they're getting ready to bring things forward to the board. The level of thought and discussion that goes into some of the things that come before us, you have no appreciation for. If you sit here behind the board table, you just say, well, you know, this is what they thought they'd do. So it's incredible. And kind of conversation that even left Ken, you know, a former administrator, in the dust, I think, a little bit, because these people are doing the research. They are getting what they're paid for. I was impressed. So I think every board member ought to go and listen to a staff committee come to consensus or a decision. It's pretty powerful stuff, and gave me a lot more trust in the decision-making of our staff.
Anybody else? So I want to address this a little bit. One of the things that that I've been thinking about is last year we were told that we had 58 meetings. And so in my head, I round that off to 60. And I say, well, the average meeting probably lasts 3 hours. I'm guessing. All right? Please. Give me a little bit of benefit of the doubt.
What time did we start tonight?
Huh?
What time did we start tonight?
6. Well, 5:30, but that was a different meeting. So we had 58 board meetings. We had other committee meetings. We had other meetings. But if you just round off 60 meetings and you say 3 hours, well, that's 180 hours that everybody here has dedicated to regular meetings. And then you add other stuff in, and when I have thought about that from a board member perspective, I figure the average board member probably puts in around 300 hours in a year. And then the board president has a lot of other responsibilities that the current president is trying to delegate to the vice president as much as possible. And the vice president is pushing back on some of it. But he's taking care of a lot of them, I will say that. But it's a lot of time, and I do view this, I love this board, I really do. And I think we do some fantastic work. I mentioned earlier that earlier discussion on budget, for me, was draining, and it really was. And I've been drained a few times in the last, the last 6 weeks or so, a couple of issues. But one of the issues that I will say is that as president, I feel an obligation to help us understand what's right. And some of those discussions are long and difficult, and they're kind of extracurricular, is how I would describe it. But I feel an obligation, I feel a passion for this board that we do things right. And so I say we got to do what we got to do. I do believe that we have a lot of teamwork, even though, like tonight, we had really incredible discussion on the tax levy rate, or the levy rate. We came up with a consensus. But one of the things that I want to get to is, well, two. One is that you heard Director Kluhl a few weeks ago present his case for policy governance. Policy governance is so far from where we are, and it's so far from what I think you're talking about, because then we would be mostly just hands off. As he said, just tell the superintendent, go for it, and don't do anything illegal. You know, and that's about it. We would have 5-minute meetings if we did that, probably. So I think we all have different interpretations of what does it mean to be a board member, what's it mean to be a board. But one of the things that happens, I thought a lot about our past superintendents and our current superintendent, and I remember Superintendent Almanza, we were talking about micromanagement. And he was indicating to me, he said, oh, well, you know, the pendulum swings this way and it swings that way. And he was talking about how much a board gets involved in micromanagement. But I remember another discussion that we had, and it had to do with his enforcement of the policy. And I think Superintendent Tate has had similar things where, like especially maybe in busing issues, where he is enforcing our policies. And do we want to overrule the superintendent? And we have that right, but I think this board would be really, really careful about doing it. And I'm not just talking about a recommendation like tonight, I'm talking about actual policies. But when I go back to curriculum, so what happens here is that if the curriculum department has said, nope, we don't need it. If we bring it up as a board then what we're going to do is to say that we, the board, I mean, depending on how the decision would go, but that we don't trust your decision. And I think that's what Director Kluhl and Director Crumwitty were talking about. And so I just think we have to be really, really careful about those types of things. On the other hand, the Agenda Committee spends considerable time looking at all these issues, trying to bring them up. But I have more confidence. I am absolutely 100% confident in our superintendent and in our administration. They do a wonderful job, and we may disagree with them, but the work that they do, I really appreciate. So when it gets into some of these areas, I don't know. I mean, you're going to have to get more support from the board. If you believe this is the absolute best, and if the superintendent has said no, it isn't, there aren't a lot of avenues for you to go. I don't know. You can try to get the board to overrule the administration, but that's going to be very, very difficult. It's getting late. Did you have any additional thoughts or areas you want to discuss?
I'll be quick, I promise. I willingly admit that I've made mistakes, poor judgments, other things that aren't appropriate for the board table. But I'm learning, I hope, and I also hope that I'm not too far behind the curve for. It's difficult to be a new board member. We've had Ken and Nikki both talked about the struggles that they experienced, and maybe a decade from now I'll be saying the same thing. Talking to the next person who's overly enthusiastic. It is not my intention to try to have the board overrule the administration. And I'm still learning to bite my tongue when I disagree, but I'm learning to respectfully disagree, and when a decision has been made, it's been made.
Any other discussion? Director Crumwitty.
Well, I appreciate having this conversation. I think it's been healthy for all of us. And, I have, this past summer when I was at the Iowa School Board Association Legislative Resolution Committee meeting, one of the things that we talked about and that most boards don't do is having more information out prior to people coming on school boards. That some type of workshop to clarify what the roles are of school board members and some of the issues that we're dealing with. And so I've talked to some people about that. I think it would be very healthy to have that sort of thing because when new people like Linda come on the board, Linda was very fortunate in having that information because she attended so many meetings. But there were people who came forward they were all great people, but they didn't have that background information that you had, because I saw you out there for the past year and I talked to you and I knew that you were learning. I knew your intention of running, but I think it would have been very helpful for you to have some type of workshop prior to running in the fall. And I think we really need to think about that for people who are considering running for the board. This is what board responsibilities are. The other thing I want to just mention, and it's already been mentioned, but perceptions of the public are so important. You know, when I first got on this board, and I was not very happy about this, the superintendent called me in and he said, I don't think you should participate in negotiations. And across the river, there were 3 board members who were asked to resign from the board because it actually was against Illinois law. They were getting either retirement funds or they had some other connection to the board. And I checked with the Iowa School Board Association. It's not illegal in the state of Iowa. I could have sat in on negotiations, but talking at that time to Tim Tupper, who was on the board, and to our superintendent, and I talked to the school district attorney, it's like, it's not illegal, it's just the perception because you have a wife that's employed in the school district. And so it's just that because she was employed, it was like, well, you know, every time you vote, are you going to think about some connection there? And I think that the other situation that came up when I first got on this board, I was employed by the Area Education Agency. And I went to the director at the AEA at that time, and I said, you know, is it illegal for me to run for the Davenport School Board? Oh, heavens, no. He said, you know, you can be on the Davenport School Board. But again, he said to me, you need to be careful about your perception that you put out there, because when issues come up from the Area Education Agency, you can look back on my voting record. I abstained when we voted on something that had to do with the AEA. Not that it was illegal, it's just the perception that you put out there. So I think that is so important, and if I've learned anything of being a board member, I think it's that you have to be very careful about the perception that you put out there.
Thank you, Director Kluhl.
Just a follow-up note, the Legislative Advocacy Committee has been in discussion with the AEA about doing a board orientation session, and I think we're on the road to doing that.
Anybody else? I've got 3 more little things I wanted to mention, but Director Dickman, did you have any other comments? Oh, okay, great. One is, I would encourage you to have a discussion with the superintendent and just talk about some of this stuff too, and understand the superintendent's perspective, what he expects from us, because I think that a conversation like that, it might help you understand a little bit more about the superintendent's position when we do some of these things, and especially as we get into that area of management. And all of us have done some of that, and I've even done some of it recently. And it's frustrating to the superintendent, I know, when we do that. But we still do a little bit of it. I was going to address that AEA training, and I know that the AEA has talked about providing that training, but I don't think it's gotten much beyond talking, has it?
No. We talked to Bill Decker about that. He is very open to having it at the AEA, but he doesn't want the AEA to sponsor it. So we have to figure out a way to do that and to sponsor, and we just have to think about a structure that might work for some of our surrounding districts.
When you were talking about it, I recalled some of the passion that you had about all of this over the years. And I thought, with only 7 or 8 months left, maybe you would take on the lead role in making sure that we had that training sometime this summer, probably. Because the original idea was to have it available for candidates that wanted to get there. So, because you're probably going to run out of stuff to do in a few
Probably.
months.
But I would suggest even if we can't put some type of structure together within the AEA and surrounding districts, that we do our own. I just think it would be helpful, and Mary's shaking his head no, or her head no. Oh, okay. Okay. I thought maybe I was doing something illegal there, but running our own workshops, because I think it would be very helpful to talk about the things we talked about tonight, our responsibilities as board members. I'm sure if we wanted someone from the Iowa School Board Association to come in and do a little spiel about it, I'm sure they would. But then I think we need to talk about our issues and what are they stepping into, because I think it would be, I was fortunate that I was in the district, so I kind of knew what some of those issues were. But a new person just coming in that hasn't been connected to the school district, I would think it'd be just kind of overwhelming. And what you're talking about, some of these things tonight, it's like, man, that's a lot to learn in a short time, because you're starting a campaign in July and you're elected in September, and it's a wham. You're in. And it's like, okay, Linda's in that seat right now.
All right, very good. And my last comment is that I wanted to thank you, Director Dickman, for your opening remarks and for your thoughtfulness on this issue. And I know that some of the discussions that you and I have had have been challenging and difficult. But I appreciate the whole board in having this discussion. I think it has really helped. It's helped me, and I again would encourage you to lean on anybody here on the board, and they will do their absolute best to help you. With that, I think we're going to end the discussion. If that's okay, we're getting on towards 2 hours past our break. Let's see here. We're down to administrative reports. Superintendent Tate.
None.
Are there any board reports? I've got 2 requests here in a minute. Anybody? Director Crumwoody.
I just want to take a minute to show our appreciation to Director Kluhl and to Mary in their leadership for the annual bus trip again. I think every year it just keeps getting better. And we just had a phenomenal group of kids this year asking good questions and making legislators think a little bit as we were sitting up there with them. So I want to thank you, Rich, for your leadership. And even though you did leave me behind, and twice, and for Mary for all the work that it takes to get that all together, because you do a phenomenal job too.
Anybody else?
And I do.
Oh,
I have a
excuse me,
request that I
Director
want to
Crumwoody.
read.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Well, why don't you hang on here until we get done with reports? Okay?
Okay.
All right. Director Kluhl, did you have something?
Just one more announcement. Talking with Toby Peone from the ISEA, he said that our request to do an education forum following the regular forum on the 7th of March at the Rogowski Center was fine. So I want to thank the ISEA and the AAUW for giving us an opportunity to have an education forum, again, at 12 o'clock to 1 at the Rogowski Center on the 7th of March. And that will give us an opportunity to talk in some detail about education issues and hopefully at that point about our bill and where it's going.
Any other reports? I've got another thank you. The Legislative Advocacy Committee, and especially Director Kluhl, Superintendent Tate, Mary, Brenda, and others have done so much with this bill, with getting our letters out. There's a lot of work, and I'm hopeful that the board understands the incredible amount of work that's taking place. There are a lot of phone calls being made. There's work being done. Oh, I should thank also Margaret Buckton for helping us with the language. And some of the things that are going on there. There are a lot of communications that have occurred with the IASB, with the ISEA, with the DEA, a lot of different organizations that are on board. There have been legal discussions, just a lot of stuff. And from my perspective, it is above and beyond what I think we would normally expect. I think the superintendent has, just penning a 3-page letter takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time. And so the passion, the dedication, the time, everything, I'm thrilled. And I'm excited because we have a chance. And I think the IASB even said, holy cow, why didn't somebody think about this before? So I just wanted to say thank you very much. Any other reports? Okay, we'll move on to requests. Director Crumwitty.
Yes, tonight Annette McCarthy came during open forum, and so I am putting in a request to for the district to give us an update on vaccinations that are going on for not only students but for staff, if any. And I also have she's provided me with some information that I want to pass on to the agenda committee.
All right, thank you very much. I've got 2 requests here. One is from Director Snyder, date of request 2/23/15, information request. I would like information regarding IHSAA policies governing athletic programming in school districts with multiple high schools. Information request from Director Snyder, dated 2/23/15. I'd like to know if lower fuel costs have had an impact on our budget in regards to busing, and if so, have we been able to put a number to it? All right, that looks like about the end. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nope, this meeting is adjourned.